Hear that? That's the sound of a patient whose health data is protected from a cyber attack. And that's the sound of a financial system that's digitally secured from bad actors. Right now, there's an invisible war being fought on a digital battlefield that impacts what we do every day. That's why at Peraton, we do the can't be done to help protect the vital systems we rely on. Because if we don't, the alternative is unimaginable. Peraton.
Hey, it's Matt from the Direct-to-Video Connoisseur here. Thanks again for listening to the DTVC Podcast. Before we jump in, I wanted to quickly let you know that my new novel, A Girl and a Gun, is available on Amazon now, both on Kindle and paperback. It follows Justin, a successful writer whose past as a scriptwriter for a fetish porn site comes back to haunt him and threatens to derail his career. As he's picking up the pieces, he gets an opportunity to make a movie called A Girl and a Gun with a rom-com star. Justin may have bitten off more than he can chew, though, because she's notoriously difficult to work with. If you're interested, you can find the link on our webpage, along with the link to my first novel, Chad in Accounting. If you have any questions, please reach out, and I thank you for the support. Now, on to the podcast. Welcome back to the Direct-to-Video Connoisseur Podcast. As always, this is Matt here, and I am joined once again by a very special guest, Mitch Lovell from the Video Vacuum. Welcome back, Mitch.
Thanks again for having me.
Excellent. Yeah. Now, I was going to say, I'm trying to think. You've been on before. We talked about. I think the very first time you were on, we talked about cannibalism and "We Are What We Are." I think, right?
Yeah, that was a while back.
That was a while back, and I don't even know if that one is still available because some of the earliest podcasts that I did during that time period, the company that I used to that houses them, they had a server mishap, and so I'm trying to work on getting those old ones back up. But I think out of the other ones that you've been on, right, we did a Dolph film, we did some Andy Sidaris, we did some Fredo and Ray, and we did some Jim Wynorski. I don't think we've ever done an Oscar winner. And so that's going to be fun that we're going to be talking about Oscar winner Nicolas Cage today.
Well, yeah, I mean, not just an Oscar winner, really. I mean, he's just kind of like a Renaissance man. I mean, he can do. He's like one of those guys that's like a character actor trapped in a leading man's body. So it's which gives its own rewards over the years as he kind of just. I don't know. He just has a knack for picking quirky roles and quirky films, and he makes some forgettable ones too. But that with such a wide range of roles, that's going to happen.
Yeah, and you make a great point about the being trapped in a leading man's body because recently, and I don't know if you saw this, the quarterback of the Green Bay Packers, Aaron Rodgers, he went to training camp for Packers training camp. He had like long hair and a beard, and he was wearing, I think, like a white tank top and jeans. And people were joking that he looked like Nicolas Cage from Con Air. And it was funny because they were comparing the two pictures. They were comparing him with Nicolas Cage. And Aaron Rodgers he's dreamy quarterback type, obviously a very good looking guy. It was interesting to see when you compare him to a movie star like Nicolas Cage, and that Nicolas Cage is that kind of movie star that it's just like, whoa, he just like he lives the part. Obviously he was Cameron Poe, we know of him as Cameron Poe, but it was like so stark that it was just like almost like Aaron Rodgers is going as a Halloween costume and Nicolas Cage is like the real deal.
Yeah, I think too it just goes with I don't think he's quote unquote method actor, but he doesn't make any half measures when he makes a conscious decision to do something for his character in the role. I mean, he just goes full tilt boogie with it.
Yeah, for sure. Now, the movie we're going to talk about today, I think, is a really good example of that. It's the film Pig that came out in 2021. Before we get in, I just want to make a very strong spoiler alert warning here that it's going to be impossible for us to discuss this movie without getting into some of the plot twists and turns and some of the things that happen throughout the film. So if you want to watch it, I don't know outside the US, but in the US it's available on Hulu. It's a 90-minute movie, so if you want to go watch it and come back, if you've already seen it or you're okay with us just talking about it, because we are going to talk kind of Cage in general a little bit before that, but I feel like it just, there's no way we'll be able to talk about this movie without giving away key plot points.
Yeah, I mean it's one of those things where it's a film that revolves around food, and it's just like that's like kind of the main ingredient if you want to kind of take it to the next level of like a analogy there, because there's a lot of stuff going on in the film, and like that it's just like a kind of a perfect capper on there. So if anybody's kind of squeamish for spoiler warnings, we're gonna have to get into that.
Yeah, for sure. Now, I think when we were talking about, what the next topic might be for you to come on the show, and you mentioned Cage, I think it's a really fascinating topic because, when we think of actors moving to the DTV realm from big screen roles, there's almost a sense of, I don't know if mailing it in is the right term, but there's almost a sense of like, I don't need to necessarily give the role that I would, the big screen performance that I would give. I'm going to be there for my quick shooting times and all of that. But it's almost like in Cage's sense, it's almost like he is like, when you're talking about the method actor, he's almost gone back to that role of being the method actor, and he's no longer, the weatherman or matchstick man or something like that.
Yeah, well, I know he made a lot of these films because he had, financial problems, and I think he gave an interview recently where he was like, well, look, I know I'm making these for the money, but I'm not phoning it in. I'm actually trying to find something that kind of that he can respond to and play off of. And I mean, I always say there's always kind of like, a couple different modes of Cage. There's like the rage Cage where he goes, really, cranks it up to 11 and sometimes 12 in movies like Vampire's Kiss and Deadfall. But then there's more of a somber Cage, where he's kind of playing the monotone, usually sensitive kind of individual that gets caught up in the wrong place or wrong time, kind of like like something like Inconceivable, or one of the later DTV films. But then there's also kind of like just like a quirky Cage where he just might kind of pepper those little random moments in, kind of like with Face Off, where he's essentially playing John Travolta, but he's like the kind of like the star of the show. But there's also, he just finds like really weird moments to just kind of put like a little zing at the end of scenes, where either like bugging out his eyes or kind of just making the scene his own.
Yeah, it's interesting with like, because I think you mentioned again that point that he has like a leading man's body. He is a leading man. He has the look, he has the presence, and but at the same time, his acting style. I mean, Face Off is a great example. I mean, he would have been great as like a Joker in a movie, or but no one would ever cast him as the Joker, at least when he was big in the 90s, because he was supposed to be Batman or Superman or whatever. We wouldn't have him be the villain. It's interesting to wonder now if, like, coming back to movies like Face Off that were such classics, that if there's a possibility now that he's in a different space that they would start considering him for some of those kind of, offbeat roles, like playing the Joker or something like that.
Well, I think he had a vision kind of for this from the get-go. I think he was inspired. I think I read an interview where he was inspired by Adam Rifkin, who would make kind of like the movies he wanted to make as Adam Rifkin, like The Chase, or it's something like that. But when he was kind of forced to make these like kind of low budget exploitation movies like Psycho Cop 2 or Invisible Maniac, he went as Riff Coogan, but he was still able to kind of put his own mark on it. And I think he had toyed with the idea of just having a pseudonym and doing like really weird roles and maybe as under like makeup as some other actor. And I think he realized that was going to just be a bit too much. So he just kind of picked and choose where he was going to kind of, go into full tilt cage rage mode.
Yeah, and it is interesting, yeah, because you think like with the new Top Gun movie out, I think of Tom Cruise, and maybe one of my favorite roles that he did was in Tropic Thunder. I almost feel like I can't remember who got Best Supporting Actor that year, but I almost feel like that would have been perfect for him because that was just such a fun performance that he had. And yeah, you can almost see. You wonder now if maybe Cage could do that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think so. I think anything's really on the table. I don't think he's going anywhere. I don't think he's slowing down. And I think I think it kind of just goes down to the material too. I think, if something like say like, Vampire's Kiss comes across your table, yeah, there's going to be room to kind of play around with. But then when you have something like Red Rock West where you're kind of working in that established kind of like, wrong guy at the wrong place at the wrong time kind of thing. So you have to dial it down. But I think he kind of is good about picking and choosing kind of where he is able to kind of put his stamp on stuff.
Yeah, and I have to be frank about Red Rock West. It's kind of a bit of a white whale of mine. It was on Tubi recently. I've always been meaning to watch it. I've always wanted to see this one. It's one that a lot of people have recommended to me as a Cage fan, and like it would be available on a streaming site. I'm like, oh, I've got to watch it now. And then when I go to see it, it's gone. So it's one that it's definitely high on my list as ones that I want to see of his.
Yeah, I mean it's one of those early '90s movies where he was kind of. It looked like for a time he was going to be a leading man, like It Could Happen to You and Guarding Test, like these kind of like sunny, honeymoon in Vegas type deals, and then like he goes and wins the Oscar for Leaving Las Vegas, and it's like, oh wow, like this, he could be really this generation's kind of like Brando, or kind of just with this like verisimilitude of just like kind of the way he goes into his roles, and then he becomes an action hero. Yeah. So I think that's part of the fun of winning an Oscar, and then you make like The Rock and Con Air and Face Off, which are three of the great big studio, big budget late '90s films, and to have a run like that after you win the Oscar, usually the tradition is you go out and make kind of like your dream project, or whatever they give you the most money for. And I think it was just kind of one of the things that's fascinating about him is just like, just when you think, you kind of got him figured out, like he does a 180 on you.
Yeah. And you look at that post Oscar period for him, kind of that maybe the 10 years after or so. And it is like this kind of up and down thing where it's like, he's doing the action films. He's doing, films like City of Angels, where it's like kind of the big romantic film, or The Family Man. But then he's like doing like, just Bringing Out the Dead, which is one of my favorites of his, which is this sort of like this sort of Martin Scorsese film that, I mean, I don't even remember it really being in the theater for that long. I think it was a very limited release film. I think some people in the Scorsese realm don't even necessarily like it, but I enjoyed that one. But yeah, it's like kind of these big films that like every once in a while, or like an adaptation comes in or something like that, where it's like he just kind of would mix in these other performances. But he was working like very heavily. Even then, it was like 1 to 2 movies a year, which is, we think of that as like a DTV actor pace, and he was doing it as like a big screen guy who had just won an Oscar.
Yeah, and with Bringing Out the Dead, what's interesting about Cage is when you have a movie like Bringing Out the Dead, or even like A Wild at Heart, or like something like where you have this really kind of broad cast of characters that are kind of, flamboyant or over the top, or like Con Air or something. And then you have Nicolas Cage, and he's like one of the most normal people in the movie, because you do need like an anchor there, to keep the wheels from spinning off. And it's just interesting that like in some movies he's the wild man, and in some movies he's the most grounded person in the cast.
Yeah, and it's funny how he does that, right? How he can play both of those the way he does. Again, it's like you said, there's his ability as an actor to do that kind of thing, just to get into a role and do both. It's very rare, right, that you see people who do both. They are either like, like even thinking of De Niro. I mean, I guess De Niro, yeah, he was just. I think later on, like he tries to play kind of more like as he got older, he started to play more of the staid, anchor in the film. But earlier on, especially with Scorsese, when he worked with Scorsese, it was just like every character he was like the kind of the crazy one that was just out there just doing whatever, and everybody else around them was affected by this one character.
Yeah, I mean that's a good comparison. And then like you have movies too where anybody else in that role, the movie might have been forgettable. Yeah. Like I'm thinking probably The Wicker Man, which I mean it's I run hot and cold on it because I like the original so much, but it's without Nicolas Cage's performance, I don't think you would be talking about The Wicker Man as much as we talk about it now, because it came out during that glut of remakes in the early 21st century, and it's without him, I mean, even the deleted scenes, with the bees, like that's more memorable than a lot of those movies that came out, around that time. So it's just kind of cool how he can put his own kind of spin on what might have been just like really a nothing part in someone else's hands.
Yeah, and I do kind of wonder, like again, like something like The Wicker Man, which I almost feel like that's the kind of role that another star in his, and again, it's hard to know, like as you get into the 2000s, that's when I think he started to lose some of it, though. I mean, he did do Ghost Rider, so I mean, he was a lead actor in a big budget comic book movie, but there's almost a sense with him that I think so many other actors, like again, we go back to maybe Tom Cruise, who's kind of an interesting comp maybe in terms of career-wise, because they kind of both come up around the same time. Tom Cruise has never won an actor, but Cruise was always very selective about who he worked with and what roles he took. It was always like, I mean, if you look at like the CV, he's worked with pretty much every major director that we can think of the past, like whatever 30 years or something. I mean, he did Coppola, he did Scorsese, Oliver Stone, whoever, he worked with them. Whereas with Cage, it's almost like I think something would come across his desk that, like The Wicker Man, I would almost think like, I wonder if even his agent was like, I don't think you should do this. I don't think this is the good part. Or, and he sees something in it that he really likes and he gloms onto. And I think with his career, I think that did change something with his career, in the sense that because he picked roles that he really liked, whether that they were going to be, make it a lot of money or not, whether the film was going to be a flop or a success, it leads to this really interesting filmography that he has, that if you were to do, you could make some really interesting film fests with Nicolas Cage movies.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there's, like you said, like even his, big budget studio stuff, there's a little bit of, Ghost Rider, he brings his own quirks, like, eating the jelly beans, or, I mean, it's very, there's only one Nicolas Cage, and you might not know which kind of Nicolas Cage you're getting when you watch a new one for the first time. But it's always kind of fun to kind of categorize them and kind of put them, label them as like kind of one of his wild and crazy guy performances, or if it's going to be like a kind of a more monotone. But even the monotone characters, he always seems to kind of, I think it's his eyes. I mean, when he's playing like these like really kind of characters that have been put through the ringer, I mean, he really sells it. And I think Pig's a really good example of like you just take one look at him and like he doesn't even say anything, but the whole story of this guy's life's been pretty, he's been through the ringer.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I think and maybe this is a good segue for us to get into Pig, because I think the role it's again it's one of those movies. I mean, when I watched Pig, it felt like, beyond the fact that it had that kind of washed out modern digital film look to it, that it's kind of where they kind of run it through a filter so they don't have to worry about matching the lighting all the time or whatever. They can just, that kind of, there's that look that's very different from what movies were like in the 90s when everything was shot on film. And beyond the fact that the film has that look to it, it feels like a lot of the kind of indie flicks that you would see in the 90s, which I always like a good 90s indie flick. It just reminds me of myself as growing up in that age where we're like, as teenager and adult, where I'd go to the movie theater just to watch some of that stuff. And it was in the theater more often. It has that kind of vibe to it. And you can almost kind of see why a Nicolas Cage would take something like this. I don't even know that he was paid that much for this role. I mean, it's a very small budget for it, but I don't know that this movie works without him.
Yeah, I mean, he's in nearly every frame of the movie. There's very rarely where he's not in a particular scene, and he's the engine that makes it work. And I mean, you know, the plot basically is someone steals Nicolas Cage's pig and he has to get it back. And it almost sounds like a Simpson joke. It's going to be like a Simpson spoof, like Taken, but with a pig, or, Bacon instead of Taken, or I don't know.
Right, exactly.
But that first scene where you see him bonding with the pig and like living with the pig and feeding it, and like, if that scene doesn't work, the rest of the movie doesn't work. And because you have to really buy his bond with this pig, and then once it's taken, you're with him the whole way. It becomes, Taken but with a pig, or Death Wish with a pig. And I think there's some parallels with John Wick there too, with the dog but with a pig. And it sounds like it's going to be silly, but it is one of the most kind of like, I mean, I got choked up watching it. Like, it's one of my favorite movies of the past, 5 or 6 years.
Yeah, and maybe this is a good segue. Maybe this is where I should really put that warning back. And this is your last chance, if you don't want spoilers, because I'm gonna dive right into the ending here, maybe. And because when you bring up John Wick, I think it brings up a good parallel. So as we talked about, the movie, the pig is lost. He's got this bond with a pig who, and I think one of the things people forget about pigs is that they're very sentient. They're essentially as sentient as dogs. So it's like, think of John Wick, right, where he has the dog that his late partner gives him, and so he has that bond with the dog the same way that Cage has the bond with the pig, the bond with the pig. And I think one of the things with John Wick is that makes John Wick work so much is that when you kill animals, right? I think it's like almost like animals first and then kids second in terms of movies, right? Obviously in real life it's reversed in terms of killing, but in a movie, because I think animals are so they're so helpless, they're so that there's a once you get a connection to them, killing them off is such a harsh thing to do in the movie. And I talked with a screenwriter, Johnny Sullivan, who wrote the movie Recoil, the one that had Stone Cold Steve Austin in it, Danny Trejo, and he actually talked about this from a screenwriter standpoint, that if you're if you're going to kill off an animal, you really got to kind of do it in the John Wick, because he was telling me about John Wick before it came out. He had heard about what was the filming and behind the scenes what was going on, and he's like, yeah, this movie with Keanu Reeves coming out, they kill the dog off, and that's how he goes on this killing spree, and that's how you believe it, because you see the dog. And this movie, we're going on this trek to find he's going on this trek to find the pig, and I get kind of what they were going for when we find out that the pig died, that the pig didn't survive the initial kidnapping. I kind of get what they were going for. It was almost like a Wizard of Oz kind of thing in a way, right? That's like, that Cage goes on this big, huge trek when he finds out that he really didn't need the pig after all. That he tells the guy that. So maybe I kind of skipped a piece here of why he has the pig. The pig is able to forage for truffles, and so in the highly competitive upscale dining market of Portland, Oregon, he's able to sell these truffles and live this sort of hermit lifestyle that he has. That's why he has the connection with the pig. And then we find out that actually Nicolas Cage never needed the pig to find the truffles. But then also we kind of find out that maybe Nicolas Cage, didn't need to live this hermit life. We find out he's living it because his wife died and he's just sort of gone into seclusion, and that maybe he needed to come out of seclusion. That going to find the pig was kind of the important thing. So kind of all roundabout here as I'm saying, but I don't know how you felt, Mitch, about the fact that we find out the pig actually didn't survive.
Well, I thought it was really well done. I think, like another thing, like that kind of like makes this kind of like a perfect double feature with John Wick in my mind is like there's this mythical backstory to Nicolas Cage's character. He's a chef that went into, that dropped off the face of the earth, but everybody knows him, and everybody everybody in the room gets silent when you mention his name. And there's like you said, that the ultra competitive Pacific Northwest underbelly of the restaurant scene, which is like it would be ridiculous for me to tell you that's what the movie's about. And there's an underground fight club where maitre d's beat the crap out of each other, but like that, you buy everything about it because it's just so kind of it doesn't look back, and it plays it with such heart and such seriousness. And I think the ending, I don't see the ending is almost an afterthought, because how many, like, I'll back up a little bit. When he goes to confront the big bad, Adam Arkin, who kidnapped his pig, he kind of roundabout learns about this one meal that he had, and it turns out he was the one that Nicolas Cage was the one that prepared it for him years ago. So when he goes to confront the villain, most movies like John Wick, they would load up with guns, make a list of all the arsenals that he needs, and here he just makes a grocery list, prepares that food, that meal that he had that will remind this guy this one happy moment of his life. I thought that was the scene that really kind of like, it's, this guy had stolen this pig because he, had lost touch with who he was. And, he was bitter from his wife being in the hospital and not connecting with his son. And that the meal that Cage prepares for him brings back his humanity. And maybe if he didn't do that, he would have maybe just had Nicolas Cage killed or thrown off the premises, and we would never known what happened to the pig. And I think that scene, more so than Cage learning about the death of the pig, is the emotional climax of the movie.
Yeah, I think you bring up a really great point, especially on the John Wick comparison, because the only real violence in the film is that underground fight club. And it's interesting because I don't even remember if was it supposed to be a fight club, or was it like they were like hiring like homeless people to to get punched in the face and see if they could like last like 10 seconds, I guess. And these maitre d's and restaurant workers were, because I think it was like a chef who was punching at one point. It was weird. It was like, was it a fight club or was it like some kind of like contest but it's like you said, it's very dark, but it also fits the movie. And I almost feel like that, and when the pig is kidnapped, those are the only two like real violent scenes in the film. And what I liked was that Nicolas Cage uses like this other like technique that's it's aggressive in its nature, and it's like almost like anti-violence but still just as aggressive. Like when he goes to this fancy restaurant that this guy that was a sous chef for him was running, and he essentially tells the guy, like, you've lost your soul in this restaurant. You wanted to open an English style pub. Why didn't you do that? But I'm just sort of giving an encapsulation of it. What he's doing is essentially just sort of bringing this guy back, and the guy finally says, yeah, okay, this is the person who stole your pig. And it's like different from like, if, in your head you're thinking like in an action movie he would have smashed the guy's head into the table and maybe like taken a knife and stabbed him in the hand or something or whatever to try to torture him and get the end. You're like, oh, I'll tell you, whatever. Whereas in this case it's like the emotion. He uses emotion to get what he wants out of people. And the way you describe the cooking that final meal for so to give people an idea of who this bad guy is, Adam Arkin, he's the estranged father of the young man that gets the truffles from Nicolas Cage and sells them in the city. So he knows. We find out from the son that the mother and father had a really rough life, a rough relationship. But one really great moment they had together was eating at Nicolas Cage's restaurant. So Nicolas Cage because the father's like, I'm not telling you where the pig is. I'll just give you $25,000 if you want, but I'm not telling you where the pig is. So to get the information out of him, he makes the same meal he made for the mother and father all those years before, and it evokes such a strong emotional reaction that he confesses that the pig died. And I did really like that approach. It's like violence without violence, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, it seemed almost like something you would see in maybe like a Korean or a Japanese film where like you said, like a violence without violence thing where and he very much seems like almost like a samurai type character. He's a man of few words, but when he says something, it really cuts to the heart of things. And like you said, when he kind of intimidates the sous chef, like you said, other movies he would have broke the guy's finger or something, but that the dressing down that he gives him I think will stay longer with him than any punch to the nose or broken arm or anything. And you can almost picture the guy quitting and going to open his dream restaurant after that moment, because what Nicolas Cage said to him is just this profound thing where he just kind of thought no one really paid attention to him, but Nicolas Cage knows him just by looking at him and just is able to just bring him down several pegs and make him see like what he could have been.
Yeah, and I mean the absurdity. Now I don't know. I'm not that familiar. I've only been to Portland, Oregon one time in my life. That was I was out visiting my sister in 2009 who lived in Seattle, and we did a day trip there. So I don't know if you have more familiarity with the Portland restaurant scene and some of what we see in the movie.
No, I've worked in a restaurant for 20 years, and I've never seen anything like that.
Right. I mean, we get, and again, it's almost something that's like straight out of Portlandia when they go to this sous chef's fancy restaurant where I can't remember what the dish was that he made, but it was like the waitress brought it to the table. It was like encased in, it was like this sort of glass chafing dish that was holding in like smoke from like fir pine cones that was like supposed to be like it was smoking the dish in fir pine cones. So when you open it up, all the smoke was released. It was the most absurd thing. And I mean, you wonder if that's like real. I mean, are people serving? I mean, I've seen like when Anthony Bourdain would do his show and he would like go visit places, there were chefs that were doing that kind of thing. I don't remember it quite to that level, but it's fascinating because you see that and you're seeing this sort of this absurdity. At the same time, there's this whole thing. We're completely invested in the idea of him going to get this pig, though, right? Like if you were to tell us that this was the movies, you'd be like, well, that's absurd. But we're like, no, it's not absurd that he wants to go get, find this pig or retrieve this pig that was kidnapped from him. But it is like a fascinating thing to see this, and like they're sitting in this restaurant environment there while people are serving dishes with like smoke in glass chafing dishes.
Yeah, I mean it's just, I think it exists on a couple different levels, because when I first saw it a couple months ago, I really enjoyed it, but I was kind of hooked on like the plot aspect. Okay, like where's it going? Is he going to get the pig back and everything? And then so this time I was able to just kind of enjoy it for those little touches, and where there's nothing tongue in cheek about it. It believes everything that it's saying, but it's saying something that's so kind of absurd that it just, you can see where like that would be well within Nicolas Cage's wheelhouse
Yeah.
of like, oh, I'm going to do Taken, but with a pig, but we're going to do it, as sincere as you could probably do that, but we're also going to give it this layer of just like kind of pulpy, comic booky kind of backstory to it, and it just keeps doubling down on that kind of fine line between absurd and sincere, and it never really missteps.
No, I mean, it really felt to me. I mean, I could have seen this coming out in the '90s. I don't know that the restaurant scene would have been, but who knows? I mean, there might have been, there's absurd restaurant ideas in the '90s as well. I think that thing felt like it really came of age in the '80s with the heart wedge lettuce or lettuce heart, whatever, like some of the absurd dishes at that time. But the actual feel of the movie, the grittiness, the locations, the sort of episodic nature of it, where we were going from place to place, it felt like so many great independent films of the '90s. And for me, that era was maybe my favorite era of independent film, was the '90s. And so to see something that harkened back to that, that kind of, there was almost like a comfort food aspect to it, which of course this movie was all about, like fancy upscale food, and I'm thinking more like this is like a good like mac and cheese or something.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely is kind of has that vibe of something you would catch on IFC at like 11 o'clock at night, and like, what is this? And then you get hooked into it. And I think more than anything, I think it's that might be kind of what Cage might have been looking for, because I think he had a run of DTV stuff that was pretty, I would say, cookie cutter, but it was they were what they were. And I think he was really kind of looking for something to sink his teeth into. And I think this was like kind of the perfect thing for him to say, okay, this might be like the next phase of my career. This might be a new kind of, a slightly tweaked version of the morose, somber kind of Cage performances. But because there's definitely a heart there, and there's definitely, I wouldn't say he would ever sleepwalk through his roles, but there are certain roles where he is just kind of monotone. And I mean, Willy's Wonderland is an example where he just kind of literally doesn't say anything in the movie, and it just kind of doesn't work because it's everything else in the movie is just kind of and it really needed a wacky Cage performance to kind of tie it together. But this, I can see him kind of using this sort of type of character motif in as he kind of gets older in his career.
Yeah, for sure. I think, thinking about this, I mean, it's interesting because I'm not the biggest Mel Gibson fan, but it's almost a sense of like he kind of almost went this way a little bit as well, and then he was sort of all sins were forgiven in a sense with his career. And he was able to kind of go back into this sort of, I want to say he almost does, like he was for a while doing baddies, and now it's almost like he can do even heroes again as sort of like the older hero. I almost feel like with Nicolas Cage, though, I mean, again, Nicolas Cage as an actor is just like sort of this other level. And I do feel like he's just, he's just going to take these things these scripts that he sees, and it's just a matter of whether or not he believes in it. He believes that he can do something with it. And I think with Pig, I mean, it had Adam Arkin in it. It had Gretchen Corbett from Rockford Files, which I was happy to see. But there really aren't a lot of big stars in the movie, and it really hinges on Cage and Cage doing it right. But I think you're right too that this needed a strong story backing it. Otherwise, it can't just be Cage on 11.
Right. I mean, the early scene with him and the pig, if you don't buy their connection, I don't think the movie works. And the scene where the pig is kidnapped is really well done because you never really see anything. You just hear the squeal of the pig, and you see Cage kind of knocked out, lying unconscious on the floor. And to that, kind of like the Hitchcockian thing, or like, you don't, what you don't see is more effective, and all you hear is like, the cry of the pig and the, squealing off into the night, and you want to see him get that pig back, and like it's like he that sequence is just really powerful, because you really, what you think you see, and what you could imagine is more powerful than what the filmmakers could have done, I think.
Yeah, no, I totally agree there. I mean, I think, they did have issues with the pig, because, they're on a tight budget with a tight shooting schedule. So I remember reading in the trivia that they couldn't get a trained pig. And I think the pig was biting Nicolas Cage a lot in the scenes that they were doing together. So that may have played into it, but it's also one of those situations, right, where necessity sometimes breeds like the better outcome. That, like, had they done something like you said, like had maybe they used a CGI pig, or if they had a trained pig and we could see the kidnapping happen, it wouldn't have been the same as what happens with Nicolas Cage. And I think one of the things too that's amazing is about that scene that made it so powerful is that he wakes up from the attack, right? Because they knock him out. I think, did they use like rock salt and a gun or something like that to knock him out? We don't really know, I guess.
Yeah, I can't remember it, because it all happens like in a flash.
Yeah.
And then, like, you're just kind of like on, not his point of view, but you're just like, looking at him on the floor, kind of crawling, kind of trying to collect his wits before he passes out.
Yeah. And then when he wakes up, he's not really sure that the pig is gone. And there's sort of a realization when he tries to whistle for the pig and the pig doesn't come, that, oh no, the pig's not here. And I thought that was a very powerful scene. That, okay, now he's got to go get the pig back. I think for me, and I think this is maybe where the movie, where, I think when the initial shock that they find out the pig's dead, when Nicolas Cage makes the meal for the dad, and he has the emotional breakdown and admits that the pig didn't survive the kidnapping. At first I was like, I can't believe they're doing this. Like, I just thought this was horrible. Like, you went through all this trouble and the pig's dead. And, again, for me, killing animals off in movies is always kind of a harsher thing. But I think it's one of those things where I'm kind of at a point where I don't know how I feel about it now. Because I've thought about, like, okay, if he has like the beautiful reunion with the pig and he goes back to his place and he's got the pig with him and he goes, what does that mean about the transformation? So I'm kind of torn. I don't know how you feel about it.
I thought it worked, because there's one like small line of dialogue with him and Adam Arkin's son before they have this kind of confrontation, and he said, if I never went looking for her, I would have just thought she was still alive.
Yeah.
And that cuts deep, because I think anyone who's ever lost somebody, I think they all, that's kind of like, do I or don't I? And, sometimes the truth is harder. But I think what worked about the movie is all three characters, Nicolas Cage, Adam Arkin, and his son, they kind of grow through the movie. Like, that, and I think the pig's death was the catalyst for that. And, Nicolas Cage gets out, he actually interacts with people, begins cooking again. Adam Arkin kind of, confronts his, hardships of his past, and the son kind of shows to his father that, he can be his own man. And I think it, like you said, yeah, the killing of the pig was harsh, but I think that, like I said, I think that was almost like an afterthought. And I think, like you said, if there had been some reunion scene and they're walking, down the road that, into the sunset, I think it doesn't really jibe with the Pacific Northwest dark, stormy vibe to it. I think it would have played a little false and Hollywoody. And like you said, this is like kind of a throwback to the indie movies, and those indie movies that always have kind of like, the pat endings.
Yeah, it's hard, right? Because I think, we're attached to the pig. And I mean, it's funny because the pig is only on the screen for like what, the first 10 minutes of the movie, I think. I mean, once the pig's
Yeah.
kidnapped, we never see the pig again, and it happens pretty early on.
Yeah, and like I said, like that kind of sets up the whole movie. Like if you don't believe his bond, then it doesn't work. And I think, you kind of put all your emotional eggs in one basket because, like, we know that yes, it's a pig, but it's really the same as Charles Bronson, going after the punks and Death Wish, or uh, or any kind of revenge kind of tinge thriller, except it kind of takes that concept and kind of turns everything on its ear by making it about food and kind of human interaction uh, and not just bloodlust. It's just like kind of like a unique, profound, kind of moving movie, I thought.
Yeah, it was. I mean, I felt like the rug had been pulled out from under me when I found out I mean, the other part of it too, I think, is that where the pig dying, I think, in my mind, I'm kind of seeing it from a surface level of like, okay, they're going on this journey to get something that's already gone, and it's almost like, well, what's the point? But at the same time, there is all of this other journey that's happening. Again, it's almost like that Wizard of Oz kind of thing, right? Where all of the characters go through this big yellow brick road journey, and they find out that the wizard really doesn't have any power, but they had gotten all of the things that they needed all along without needing the wizard there. And so I guess I can see that, like, okay, yes, he didn't need the pig after all. It was just, I guess, the idea that the pig was a sentient being that died, that made it tough. That was like, oh man, it went through like this scary kidnapping thing and died off, and it seemed kind of harsh. And I guess maybe the movie was harsh, right? So I guess in that sense, maybe that was part of it.
Well, I think it was kind of, he had to know one way or the other.
Yeah.
And it, like I said, like that line of dialogue where he's like, well, if I didn't go looking for it, I would have never known. And I think what we know about that character is that he, I think, he had lost and lost and lost, and he made the conscious decision to live in the woods all alone with the pig. And I think the pig was the only thing kind of keeping him there. Because at the end of the movie, the last scene of the movie is he walks to the house, but then he keeps walking.
Yeah.
He doesn't go inside the house. So I think that was kind of let us know, like, okay, I'm kind of done with that.
Yeah.
Like if it ended with him going through the open door and shutting it, yes, he hasn't learned anything. But yes, the fact that he goes to his house but then keeps walking was kind of like, yes, he's been on a journey, but he's grown from it and he's moving on.
Yeah, and there is, I mean, I was looking through the trivia a bit just to, again, because I think that's what happens sometimes with a movie where if something doesn't feel right about what happened, I wanted to explain to me like what was going on there. And there is a bit of Greek mythology underpinning some of the film. Like the restaurant that they eat at is the new restaurant that Chef Finway's opening is called Eurydice, I think, or who's a character in Greek mythology who she dies, and the Orpheus, her husband, tries to bring her back from the dead. And in a way, it's kind of similar, right? That maybe Cage in that sense is Orpheus in one way or the other, right? That he's either Orpheus because it's his wife that's died and he can't accept it and wants her to come back from the dead, or the pig, right? That he tries to save the pig, and that the dad, Adam Arkin, is Hades, right? He's the underworld, and I guess part of Hades, the myth of Hades that I'd kind of forgotten, was that I think he was keeping his wife in the Greek mythology. He kept his wife in like a state of kind of undead form or something, which is similar to the mom, right? The mom who tried to kill herself is being kept alive through machines. And to your point too about how what we don't see, I'm kind of doing an aside here as I'm kind of talking about this, but that your point about how what you don't see is sometimes more powerful than what you see. We never actually see the mom, right? We see the son go to talk to the mom. He looks in through the hospital door, or the hospital room door at the mom, but we actually don't see her, which again makes you wonder, like, oh, is she, scarred? Is she disfigured from the or is she, what does that look like? And that was a very powerful scene. But I think there was that idea that I think sometimes when movies are doing that, when they're doing the sort of Greek mythology underpinning, the thing about Greek mythology, right, is that it seems like with almost all of the great myths, it was always the journey more than the end that was important, that the transformation the characters went on the journey.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that fits the theme of the movie, pretty snugly. And another thing with the mom in the either a coma or in the hospital room, the son tells Nicolas Cage at one point, "Oh, she's dead."
Yeah.
And because it's just easier for him to say that to Nicolas Cage than really kind of go into all that. And then, like, 2 scenes later or whatever, we see him at the hospital talking to her, and it's like, oh, so it's like, at some point too, Adam Arkin and Nicolas Cage are kind of two opposite sides of a coin, where kind of Cage kind of dropped out of sight when his wife died, and Adam Arkin, just kind of became, this kind of like, almost like kingpin figure of the restaurant scene. And, it's kind of interesting. And the thing that kind of brings both of them together is their, their love of food. So it was interesting to see where, like, kind of like, took, really hard losses in life and how they kind of branched out from that.
Yeah, and I mean, going back to that sort of Greek mythology piece, that if we're talking about the dad as being a Greek god in a way, right, of being, Hades, or the dark king of the underworld, and even the idea that the restaurant industry is the underworld, I thought was it's a really interesting idea if that's the case. But when you think of Greek mythology, right, the mortals, when a mortal has to try to defeat a god, they can't just do it through brute strength, right? They have to somehow find a way to play on their emotions and either trick them or curry their favor in a different way. And I think that again, there was something very aggressive about that scene where he's making the meal for the dad. And again, even that part of it, even that idea of that was kind of crazy, right? Where you've got Nicolas Cage sends the son out to get a whole bunch of items for him, and with the idea in mind that he's going to be making this meal. We don't know that that's what it is. We just think we don't know what he's getting all of these items for. We don't even know what the items are. And then we see him showing the son how he's making the meal, and he puts it together all at the dad's house, right? The dad doesn't care that they're there, which in a way is almost kind of also Greek goddish, right? Like, like the characters go into Hades and they just, they go into the underworld, and that's just where they are. They're just there. And, the god just shows up at a certain point, but you can kind of hang out down there. The fact that they could just hang out at the dad's house and make a meal without the dad really caring, it's really interesting. But then they bring the dad in, and Nicolas Cage is presenting this meal to him, and there's something very aggressive about the way he's presenting it that is, like, again, it's almost like more of that anti-violence, that it's like he's really playing on his emotions in a very strong way, the way he's giving him this meal. That, yeah, somebody who watches a lot of action movies, it was refreshing to see action done a little bit differently.
Yeah, and it's interesting to see Arkin. I had seen it before, and I was kind of caught up in, oh my God, what's Nicolas Cage doing? But this time I was more focused on Adam Arkin, and he's pretty phenomenal in that final scene where, because at first he's kind of sitting there with his arms crossed, like, I know what you're up to and it's not going to work kind of look on his face. And then even like the first bite doesn't really do it for him.
Right.
And it's, and he still kind of has this chip on his shoulder. And then by like the second or third bite, he's in tears.
Yeah.
Because he knows, like, it just somehow Nicolas Cage was able to cut through, this guy's, like, however long grudge that he's kind of had, and just be kind of reduced to tears. I thought it was really interesting because, like I said, it's not that first bite because he's still kind of a dick about it.
Yeah.
And then, eventually he just caves in, and it's just like a really, really, I thought, like watching again, I thought that scene and his performance, I thought that was really, if not we're not on solely Nicolas Cage's journey. I think it was a little bit about Arkin's character's transformation as well.
Yeah, and the son too, right? The son goes through a bit of a transformation. When Nicolas Cage first finds out that his pig has been kidnapped, he has to go to the son because the son is his only. It's the son's character name is Amir. Amir's his only connection to the outside world at this point because he's the one who's been buying the truffles off him. So he drives his fancy Camaro up to Nicolas Cage's out of the way, sort of house that's kind of out in the woods. And so he ends up having to go to the diner and calling the son to come pick him up. And then the son, he goes with the son kind of along these different places where he thinks he might, be able to find clues and whatnot. And then we start to learn more about both characters. And as we learn about the son, it's really interesting because there's that sense of like trying to come out from underneath the shadow of his dad. His dad's such a huge figure in the restaurant world and a very cutthroat and almost evil figure in the restaurant world. And the son wants to carve his own path. But then there's also kind of a fear too that at some point the dad's going to take away from him, which he ends up doing, right? Because he takes the pig in a way to try to steal from his son this edge that the son has in the business. And even that part of it I think is interesting to see, like sort of that you could almost go Greek there, almost the Oedipal complex thing there as well, that the mom and dad, not quite Oedipal, but the idea of not that he wants to kill his father, but he wants to at least sort of best him in a way.
Yeah, I totally agree, and I think the that lashing out of the gods, so to speak, kind of sets the hero out on the quest because he's he feels smited or wronged and somehow, and is very very much in line with those old stories.
Yeah, it's again, there is my own personal bias where I wanted the pig to live. I wanted them to be reunited at the end, and I wanted that ending. And I think there's still part of me that's torn about that part of it. But I think if I'd gotten what I wanted, I don't know that the movie would have. I think for me getting what I wanted, I don't think the movie would have worked as well for so many other people that really enjoyed it.
Well, I mean, it's it's almost like a heads or tails at that point, because I think at the end of the day, the point of the story wasn't did the pig survive. The point of the story was Cage is kind of reconnected with humanity.
Yeah.
He's kind of taking his first steps back to becoming the person that he used to be. And yes, it was a horrible thing had to happen in order to do that, but it was a horrible thing that happened that drove him into seclusion. So I think, and like I said, it was a very unique kind of riff on a revenge piece where it was driven by kind of like human connection rather than like kind of like just pure revenge. And for that, I mean, I think it'll last, it'll stand the test of time, I think, a lot better than some of the more like the John Wick ripoffs, so to speak.
Yeah, and I think even when we talk about the Fight Club scene, again, the whole point of it was a unique kind of Fight Club because he talked about it being an underground fighting thing, but there was this element of it which they didn't really explain much, but it seemed like the whole point was that it was like they were getting homeless people and they were paying them to stand there and take punches from people in the restaurant industry, which I guess the stress of working in the restaurant industry, they want to just like let it, and maybe in Portland it's even worse. And so even that, where Nicolas Cage's character, because he wants to get information from the guy who runs the underground fight club, he thinks he can get information to get him to where he needs to go next. in order to do that, he has to essentially be one of these homeless guys. So here he goes from being like the top apex, one of the best, the greatest chef in the Portland restaurant industry, to being, just the interesting thing is, at that point we don't know that he's a great chef, right? So just to give people an idea of what happens here, if you're listening to us and you haven't, you're okay with the spoil, you've been okay with the spoilers to this point. The way that they had it set up, where like the homeless person would put their name on the list, right, on these like cardboard boxes that were stuck on the wall, and you'd write the name on there. And he writes his name, his character name, which was Rob Feld. He writes it in big letter, Robin Feld. He writes it in big letters across the top, and everybody just looks in awe. But we think everybody's just looking in awe because maybe he was like the best of these like homeless men who came down and got beaten up by restaurant workers. We don't know that, no, he was actually one of the restaurant workers. We don't know if he actually attacked people. Like, we kind of think he probably didn't, right? I don't see that in his character, but he obviously knew about this, and he would have been, as a chef, he would have been known by all of these people. And it was fascinating because when he, when somebody's chosen to be the one to beat him up, at that moment we don't realize that what this person's doing, they're essentially beating up one of the greatest the greatest chef of that area. Like, it's this legend. And it's a really fascinating scene that, again, he doesn't throw a single punch in that scene. He doesn't do anything except for stand there with his hands behind his back taking punches. And he earns the respect of the guy who's running the show to give him the information he needs. It was a really interesting take on the Fight Club thing, right? That he's not fighting anybody, he's not beating, because we would think it wouldn't have been that unbelievable if he would have beaten somebody up in that scene. But it was a really unique take on it, I thought.
Well, again, I don't think he raises his fist once in the whole movie, like you said, and that. In the traditional revenge movie, that would be where, Liam Neeson or whoever would get into like a cage fight or something with somebody. And, or like the scene where he, shakes down the sous chef for information. He just sits there and gives him a verbal dressing down. And, it was like you said, just like this kind of passive aggressive, nonviolent violence. It just, just another example of that.
Yeah, and even like the dressing down of the former sous chef, it's like he's playing on the guy's emotion and sentimentality. He's essentially saying to this guy, you're losing your soul here. And we get maybe a little bit of a glimpse inside of Nicolas Cage's character, that he kind of feels like the whole thing was worthless too, that it was just ridiculous to be making these absurd meals for rich people. And the point that he makes too about the fact that these people don't care about you, because I think that's a really good point to think about too with this fancy restaurant industry, right? That, just think of here in Philadelphia, that the places that people go to year after year are the staples that just sort of make comfort food, the bars, the cheesesteak places or the hoagie places or whatever, that the fancy restaurants come and go. That, the fancy place with the fancy chef, who the celebrity chef is making like this fancy stuff, it people can take it or leave it, right? If that goes, they'll just find another place like that to go to. Whereas, the English pub idea that the guy originally had, when a place like that closes down, the people that are regulars there feel bad, like they miss something's missing out of their lives. And that's the point that he's making to this guy, is that none of these people that are at your fancy restaurant care about you. They care about being in some scene. They care about having some sort of social credibility or social capital to be in a place like this. But what's fascinating, I think, about the transformation that Nicolas Cage makes is that he has that realization when his wife dies. He's like, why was I doing all of this stuff? And he just goes into like seclusion. But you wonder, now that I'm thinking about it, as I'm talking here, I'm kind of going all over the place here. But when he talks to the sous chef, I wonder if he has the realization too that there's a middle ground, right? That there's not selling out your soul, but there's also not living out in the woods. That there's the English pub middle ground that you could do, or something like that. And maybe that's when part of his transformation as the main character.
Yeah, I can see that. And like another aspect of the conversation is the chef used to work for Nicolas Cage.
Yeah.
And he says, I fired you.
Right.
But I remember you talking about this English pub, and you have to wonder if Nicolas Cage maybe fired him on purpose in order to let this guy go so he could go, make his dream a reality of opening this pub. And there might be this kind of just sadness about Cage when he comes in and he learns that this guy is just kind of throwing everything away to be in this trendy restaurant. And like you said, these kind of, these trends kind of come and go, but like a English pub, that could be a cornerstone for any kind of neighborhood, eatery. And, I think there is kind of a tinge of just kind of, just like disappointment. And I think, anybody else in the chef's life would have kind of sugarcoated anything they had to say. And Nicolas Cage just cuts through so bluntly that it just destroys the guy. And you just see the guy's reaction really doesn't change.
Yeah.
But his eyes move ever so slightly. Like it looks like he is just just been devastated by what he's just been told. And it's a fabulous performance.
Yeah, the actor was David Knell, who I'd seen in other stuff before. And it's funny because he's actually the same age. He's actually a little bit younger than Nicolas Cage, but his character, I think he was playing somebody who's younger than him in the movie. And you're right. It's a fantastic performance in the way that he's clinging to this idea of, no, I'm successful because this is success. And I never made that connection that Nicolas Cage may have fired him on not because he says in the conversation he fired him because he couldn't cook pasta, but I never made that connection that he fired him because he didn't want him living this life that wasn't meant for him. And it turns out that it ended up having the opposite effect, right? That by firing him, it almost it made the guy double down and really push for this fancy restaurant world.
Yeah, because in an English pub, you wouldn't need to be cooking pasta.
Right.
So it makes sense.
Yeah, I never considered that was, that was part of, Nicolas Cage trying to help this person by firing him, and he comes in and finds him doing this other stuff instead. And yeah, because he says to him, doesn't he? I think that's even one of the lines. He's like, "What happened to the English pub?" And the guy's like, "What do you mean?" And he goes through the whole thing about, when I was firing you, I asked you what you wanted to do, and you said you wanted to open an English pub, and it's an interesting thing too. I again, this kind of celebrity chef world, I would imagine there is something probably enticing about it, but also too, I mean, one of the things he talks about is the fact that, well, I've got to make my investors happy. I've got, the former sous chef who's now running this fancy restaurant, talking about everybody that he's got to make happy and how he's sort of always chasing it. And I think, that's where we kind of get into, we kind of get a sense of this dark actor and Adam Arkin, who's this dark puppet who's pulling all the strings. And I think even the main character that sous chef says when he finds out that, okay, well, when he divulges that it's the dad who kidnapped the pig, or had the pig kidnapped, he says something along the lines too of you don't tell this guy no, or something like that. So he really has this air of being the dark underworld god who's running everything.
Yeah, I mean, it's to me, it almost seemed kind of like Kingpin from Daredevil, that there is but I think it was really interesting, because if you had gotten somebody, say a Lance Henriksen, or Jonathan Banks, somebody that you would just kind of, oh, okay, well, he's the villain.
Right.
I don't think it would have had the same. I mean, they're both fantastic actors, and they could have done that dinner scene, wonderfully. But you have someone like Adam Arkin, who is kind of, you're not really known for kind of playing violent characters, or kind of intimidating characters. So when he says something intimidating, it kind of works, because he, either we know he lives in this big kind of castle, or mansion or something, but like, like he's kind of he could be vaguely mafioso, sort of, maybe, but like not real. They don't really kind of go that way with it. But I think it was just an interesting choice to pair up with Nicolas Cage, because he's really not, your stereotypical villain type. So when he does something that's a little intimidating, it really worked.
Yeah, there's a sophistication and I'm trying to think of there's like a sophistication, there's sort of an upperclassness to his villainy that makes it work, but not in a way that, like, you're not like a Bond villain kind of way. It's very much, I mean, again, like the fact that his home is just very open and people can just show up at his house. It's not like he's like this guy who's got like all this security. I mean, he lives in a mansion, he lives in a very fancy place, but the fact that they just show up and start cooking at his house, and he's not like in there being like, get out of my house, get out. He's just like, he's doing paperwork and the son comes in and says, we made you dinner. And he's like, okay, I'm going to sit here and eat. It's a fascinating, again, yeah, I think you again, kind of just going back to some of these decisions where it's like, it takes what we know of as villainy and it makes it something very different, but yet that still really, really works for this movie.
Yeah, and I think at every turn, it used kind of the template for like a revenge thriller, and just was seeing, okay, how many different ways we could poke holes in this until it becomes like this other thing. And like I said, it still would pair wonderfully with John Wick as a double feature. But another thing, like, it's 90 minutes. It's like the perfect DTV length for an actioner. But at the same time, like, like you were saying, like the indie movies, it's done in like 3 chapters, and they each have like a little kind of foo-foo little title under each one, or it could almost be like courses of a meal kind of thing, like a restaurant menu or something. So it was just a really unique and special movie, and I just love the way that it just kind of just played in that sandbox, but basically took all the sand out of the box.
Yeah, well, you bring up a good point about the length, because according to the IMDb trivia, nearly an hour was cut from the movie by the distributors because the distributors didn't want, or movie was nearly an hour was cut from the movie because the distributors didn't want to distribute something that was over 2 hours. I think that's interesting, that because it's almost like, we talk about this a lot with Albert Pyun, where his movies get taken away from him, and sometimes they come out better than what he had planned for them. And I wonder if that's another situation like that here. And of course, the filmmaker, Michael Sarnowski, this was his first feature-length movie, so maybe he needed that sense of like, okay, here's where you can cut it. Because I can't imagine what this would have been like at 2.5. We probably wouldn't have been doing it for this episode if it was 2.5 hours long. But because the story arc fits exactly how it should fit, I think.
Yeah, well, I mean, to use the expression that should fit with this, it's like, too many cooks, right? I think it would just, by paring it down to its essentials, I think you get the most out of it. There are some movies where, like a hangout movie, you could have, rode around with him in the car for a little bit longer, and you could have played those scenes out a little bit longer. Maybe him reconnecting with like the people that he's lost. But at the end of the day, I mean, that it really, for me, it had no false moments. It had no kind of wasted scenes. Every scene kind of built on the next one, and you had just the perfect amount of information to get you to the next scene. And I mean, it was, I loved it.
Yeah, it's funny because we I think when you've been on before, we've talked about the idea of like quantity over quality, in the sense of like as many movies as possible. But I think like in terms of a movie itself, Roger Corman's 88-minute rule, there aren't a lot of movies that you look at and go, boy, it really could have been longer. And I'd be curious to know what was cut from this, because I think that's one of the things with the movie being on Hulu is there isn't a DVD. I mean, I can't imagine like if there's a DVD that had the hour of of deleted scenes, like what they would have looked like. But I think, again, sometimes a lot of times with movies, less is more. And it's one of those things. I know it's not an easy thing to like have like your minute of script time for a minute of shooting time, but there's so few movies that really could use an extra half hour. It's usually the other way around. And I wonder with Michael Sarnowski, because I mean, according to IMDb, he had only done shorts and TV episodes before this, so maybe he didn't quite understand what a feature length should be, or maybe he wanted it to be this big thing that it didn't need to be. But one of the things I love about a movie is when I can watch it and be like, I don't think there was a scene that was unnecessary in the film.
Right, and I actually watched it a couple nights ago when you had emailed me. I was like, well, a lot of times, especially in the summertime when I'm working, it depends on, what night it is or whatever. But if I sit down on the couch, I might be good for a half hour, 45 minutes tops. So I wanted to watch it, in case I did fall asleep, and give me 2 or 3 days. And I watched it straight through, and I was, blubbering at the end, so I think nowadays, like I'm game for just about anything, but like right now, like unless it's like like a home run for me, it's hard to kind of sit still and kind of focus on the movie. But like it worked even better, I think, this time around.
Yeah, it's interesting talking with you about it because I've only seen it the one time for us to discuss it here. I mean, when I was looking for what would be a good Cage movie for us to discuss, this one felt like the one. And I saw that I think I saw in Letterboxd that you'd already seen it, and I thought this could really be the one. And it has been the one. I mean, this is like, we've got so much material that we've been able to chat about here. But I think, I think looking at it as as this kind of a movie that's low budget. I mean, it probably, I don't know if it would have been DTV in the 90s. It might have been, I think it was listed as a limited release movie. It might have been that, but for thinking of an actor moving into the DTV world or this kind of like low budget indie world, this is like the movie. This is the one that I don't know. Yeah, this is the kind of thing that you want from that actor. This is like kind of the opposite of what you expect when they go into this world.
Well, I mean, it was funny when you had said Nicolas Cage, and I think there's a part of me that was like, oh God, like, is it going to be like jujitsu or like, like kind of like one of these like, between worlds where it's kind of just like pretty bad. Mm-hmm. But then you said Pig, I'm like, oh, absolutely. Let's I was using an excuse to rewatch it, and I think yes, it kind of had like a limited release, and I think they were hoping to get some Oscar nominations or something out of it, and then once that didn't happen, it just kind of went straight to streaming. But like that kind of tells you kind of like in this day and age what DTV could be. Yeah. You could have a really quirky script with a really dedicated actor and a new director who's looking to do things a little bit differently, and kind of make something with a little indie kind of flair to it. And, right. And it's, right alongside, when you're looking through the streaming dial with like Prisoners of Ghostland or like Kill Chain or something, you know what I mean? And, you might not know what you're getting into when you click on Pig, but it's like, it's kind of like an oasis in the desert,
Yeah, and the other fear, of course, I had, right, is that the movie that we pick is if it's not if it hadn't been Pig, if it was something else, how much is he in the movie for? I don't know how much he's in jiu-jitsu for. I haven't seen that one yet either, but jiu-jitsu is probably more right in line with what kind of movies that we we're used to talking about on here. But I think you make a great point about like this being a sense of like what DTV could be. And I think there's a few Nicolas Cage movies like that have that feel. Another one that comes to mind is Ghost Rider: Spirit of Vengeance, that sequel movie he made. I mean, it's essentially a comic book movie that's done like a DTV film set in Bulgaria. And it's got him, it's got Christopher Lambert, it's got Idris Elba. Cage, I think, is going to be someone who he's going to make DTV something different than what we've expected from it all these years, and I really hope, I hope it's going to be more him and less, people like Bruce Willis coming to the table and saying, hey, can you get me in as many movies as you can in the next year or two or something like that.
Well, I mean, from what I understand, I think Cage's financial problems are kind of behind him now, and I think he's kind of free to do whatever. And I think there was a part of him that did these movies for the money, but at the same time, I think he saw it as an opportunity to maybe do things a little differently. Maybe there won't be so many eyes on me, because this will be going straight to streaming. Maybe I can open up and do a little, something different. And I really appreciate that. And the fact that, we were able to get a DTV sequel to Deadfall, with him reprising the character of Eddie in Arsenal. That in itself was a minor miracle, and it was a minor miracle that was actually good and he was funny in it. So I'm always surprised. I'm always not surprised because I think I've been a Nicolas Cage fan since probably Valley Girl. When I saw that very early on, and it's just kind of really. It's like rolling a dice. Rolling the dice. It's like, which Nicolas Cage are we going to get? Are we going to get the wild and crazy Cage? Are we going to get the subtle Cage? Are we going to get I'm only here for 10, 15 minutes. Let's do something crazy like in Grindhouse. I'm still waiting for the Werewolf Women of the SS movie with him as Fu Manchu. I mean, that might be my, that's one of the top 3 or 4 cameos of all time.
Yeah, no, that's a great point, because I mean that kind of stuff, and I think that's the thing with Cage, right? Is that he's good for that kind of thing. Seeing those Grindhouse segments and some of the actors they got for those, but Nicolas Cage is someone who just shows up and just does it in this way that's just it always works. I think, or I shouldn't say it always works. That's not true. It works when it's him. It's him that works, and it's just a matter of, does the movie work with it? So I mean, I can think of some of his movies that didn't necessarily work, but he in them seems to be okay. And there's the Bad Lieutenant movie that he did with Werner Herzog, I thought was another interesting one. I think Abel Ferrara was not that keen on another Bad Lieutenant movie being made. I don't think he liked it because it's not really the same as the other movies. But that was another one where it's like Werner Herzog just seemed to get what Nicolas Cage brings to the table. And he brought it. It was this just amazing energy that, again, and that one also had Val Kilmer in it. But I think thinking about these movies that he's been kind of getting involved in now that he's not really doing a lot of big budget stuff, it's been some real interesting things. And I think Pig is just another one in that vein.
Yeah, I mean, Bad Lieutenant's a great example of from the the artwork or the thumbnail, if you're watching it on streaming, it looks very generic.
Yeah.
I think it's his face and Eva Mendes in black and white, and that's all you see.
Right.
And it gives you no indication of what kind of a quirky and weird movie it is. And it's almost like Werner Herzog doing Law and Order or something. And it's just I can't say it all works, but it makes me wish that that those two guys would get together and do more stuff. And honestly, Cage, when he does direct to video stuff, still, I mean, I think Bad Lieutenant was a limited release, but he's doing his direct video version, a very eclectic mix. It's not just like Keone Waxman, right. Again, you know what I mean? It's like he's really working with kind of some really great talent, and it's if they can kind of slip in, kind of some subversive elements into whatever, otherwise be regarded as just another DTV actioner, then I'm all for it.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think, I think Bad Lieutenant also was another one that was like limited reach. I always have the rule for my blog that I consider it DTV if it made less than, well, the original rule was if it made less than 10 million at the theater. But I think was it Kenner at Movies in the Attic told me I should adjust that for inflation. That especially for older movies that made 10 million in the theater, like that's actually a lot of money for them to be making. But yeah, like whereas like modern movies, 10 million is like barely anything. That if they maybe I should have it be a different number. But yeah, that's always been my rule for those. And it's interesting because Cage, I think probably his name is enough to get a lot of these in the theater for even a limited release. And then it's just, see what we can do, what kind of buzz we can get, and then let's get it into the different streaming places. And, Hulu's a great place for that kind. I mean, Hulu has a ton of Nicolas Cage stuff. And actually, I had to search for Pig. I couldn't. It didn't just come up as like a recommended one. But he has a good amount of stuff on there. So people could do some real interesting film fests with just what he has on Hulu even.
Well, that's how I always kind of gauge the worthiness of a streaming service, is if they have their own Nicolas Cage section. Yeah. And there are quite a few. I think Peacock and Paramount. I think Tubi at one point did have one. I don't think they had it now, but and it's a good eclectic selection. It's not just like the last 3 or 4 DTV movies. I mean, because he's worked in all genres and all, for the past, 30 years or so. Yeah. And so, like you said, you could really, make a good film festival, and only you wouldn't even have to leave the streaming site.
Yeah, I mean, just thinking about I think one that hasn't really made it to any streaming sites that's always been a favorite of mine, of course, is Moonstruck. I think we rented it on Amazon one time. I think that's what it's available for. It's like, yeah. Oh, actually, it's on Cinemax Prime, so maybe it's part of HBO Max. So it's actually on HBO Max now. I didn't realize that. So it is one of the streaming sites has it. But I mean, that's just such a fascinating movie with all of the characters in it, all of the people playing different things, and that's the situation, right, where we talk about where Cher is she's kind of the anchor, and Nicolas Cage is able to be, as eccentric as possible, and it's when you put him in an ensemble cast like that, when he's like in his mid to late 20s, with all of these other big names. I mean, Olympia Dukakis, Danny Aiello, Cher, obviously, Vincent Gardenia. To see him act with them and do such a great job with them at that age, and then he can kind of like be in a movie like Pig, where he's come full circle as an actor, and he's the veteran now with all of these other actors. I mean, Adam Arkin obviously is a veteran as well, but he can still kind of fit in and just be himself in the movie. And it's like the way that he takes it over just feels very organic, which I really like about him.
Yeah, it's interesting too, because I mean that came out right after like Peggy Sue Got Married,
right?
And he was doing these leading man roles, and like I said, he's like in, even Raising Arizona, like it was like back to back to back. He's doing these leading man roles as a character actor.
Yeah,
he's finding a weird offbeat either delivery or hairstyle or kind of like just posture, and he just doesn't let go. And I think I remember hearing stories like both Cher and like Kathleen Turner were like, what the hell, like, because this was like a new concept of leading man. Yeah. And I think that just kind of showed very early on. And I think with Vampire's Kiss, like he pushed it to see how far he could go. He said, okay, I can go this far. And then he kind of had to retreat a little bit after Vampire's Kiss. But I think it was like almost like a social experiment. Like, how can I lead a multi-million-dollar movie, and how eccentric will they let me be?
Yeah, well, I mean, Peggy Sue Got Married, that was one I watched again recently, so I hadn't seen that one in forever, and my wife was a big fan of it, and so we watched it again. the same thing like with Nicolas Cage's character. He had to play this role in such a way where you both get why she would be divorcing him later in life, why she would be thinking about wanting to go off with this beatnik guy, but at the same time why she'd be in love with him and why she wouldn't want to leave him for the beatnik guy and why she would keep coming back to him. And he plays that role so well. Like there aren't many actors that could have played that character the way he did in that movie, and make it work like that. And again, he's like only in his mid-20s at that point, playing a part like that.
Yeah, and two kind of characters in two different timelines too.
Right.
And I think everyone thought because Francis Ford Coppola was his uncle, is like there was no way he was getting fired from this movie. Right. So I can be as tweaked as kind of I want to be, and Uncle Francis won't fire me. Right. But I think at the same time, like I said, it was almost like a social experiment. And I know he's like a big fan of silent acting.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of that too, like in his expressions in those movies where they say 90% of acting is listening. So when other people are delivering dialogue to him, he often has this almost like silent actor kind of expression of like taking in information. He'll do kind of bug out his eyes a little bit or like nod his head kind of like a little too much. You know what I mean? It's almost kind of like these kind of like grand gestures like you would normally see kind of like a character actor do, whoever's playing gas station attendant number 2 in like an exploitation movie, but he's doing it as a leading man, and I think it's just kind of encapsulates kind of like what makes him Nicolas Cage.
Yeah, I never considered the silent movie thing, because there is like a little bit of Harold Lloyd in some of his reactions to things that you see, but also even like Valentino from a leading man standpoint that he brings. That I'd never really considered before, but that makes a lot of sense. And like you said, like kind of the eyes and the gestures that he does. He has it's a unique situation where he has a leading man presence. But like you said, he acts in the film as if he's the character, right? Like he's Dennis Hopper in a movie, in a David Lynch movie, and it's like Dennis Hopper is just in there, just playing a character and just talking about Pabst Blue Ribbon or doing whatever he's doing. But Nicolas Cage is doing that as the main character, as the lead character that is on the marquee and is in the lion's share of the scenes. It's fascinating to watch how he does that.
And at the same time, like to swing from that side of the pendulum to, even when he won the Oscar for Leaving Las Vegas, there are oddball touches all over that performance. Yeah. I feel like a prickly pear, and there are and it's like, oh well, he's drunk or whatever, but like you realize that no, that's just like a common kind of theme of Nicolas Cage, kind of like rising to like a crest of like craziness and then kind of coming back down, and it's so funny too how within the span of a couple years he did Honeymoon in Vegas and then he did Leaving Las Vegas, right. And they're both kind of like that flip side of like the Vegas idea of getting married, having the time of your life in Vegas, and then like losing it all, dying miserable and alone in Vegas. And it's just like kind of like little themes like that kind of crop up in his movies like that. And I like seeing kind of motifs like that kind of coming and going.
Yeah, and I remember when Leaving Las Vegas was first, people were first talking about it and thinking this could be a movie. I think there was even like a buzz about maybe he might win an Oscar for it, but there was a sense of like, wait, Leaving Las Vegas? Are you talking about the one? No, that's Honeymoon in Vegas, and it's like, oh, right, okay, it's a different movie, and realizing that he could do that. So, I mean, I always had this sense when he did Leaving Las Vegas, it's almost like he got the Oscar out of the way, and then he was just going to do all the big budget stuff that he could do, and I never really, because when in the 90s, of course, we didn't really have IMDb to go and look at somebody's filmography, top to bottom, and be able to pick out trends and things like that. And I never really looked at it like I do now, that it's like, no, yeah, he was doing big budget things, but his decisions for what he wanted to pick were not based on like, is this going to make me hundreds of millions of dollars, or is this going to like further my career? It was, do I like this character, and can I do something with this character? Is there something intriguing about this for me? And so, yeah, it didn't lead to kind of like the Tom Cruise career, where he's like just handpicking all what he thinks are going to be the perfect roles for him as he moves along. And in that sense, there's almost like a sense of danger about it, where it's like, what is Nicolas Cage going to do in this movie? Because he's not as guarded about his career.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's kind of like I said, it's like rolling the dice. Like, what Cage are we going to get? And I think what was kind of fun, but like, I mean, like, is that unpredictability? Like, in the 90s, he did like The Rock and Con Air and Face Off, and like even like Gone in 60 Seconds. Okay, well, he's like an action hero now. And then like, I mean, even sort of like, Ghost Rider would still kind of fall under like the studio kind of tentpole stuff. But when he went like, into the DTV realm, it was kind of like, oh God, like really? Like, no, like it's everything all right? But then you're like, no, that I think he probably enjoys being kind of like a larger fish in a smaller pond. 'Cause like I said, like, I think, it gives him kind of a little bit more leeway to be kind of creative with his acting choices.
I mean, I would be curious. So, I remember in the late 2000s when Cage was doing things like Knowing, National Treasure, Book of Secrets, Drive Angry, some of that kind of stuff. I remember watching, Ebert and Roper at that time, and they were talking about how it was kind of this crazy thing that here's this big star, big leading man in Nicolas Cage, who's putting out movies that aren't being screened for critics. It just was unheard of. But I mean, another star that was going through was doing the same thing would be like, Adam Sandler with those Billy Madison kind of movies that he did. He just, didn't bother screening them for critics. He just sort of left them. And but they were shocked by that. And it was because I think, some of these movies that he was doing, like, Next, I think, is one that comes to mind. Knowing is another one. I mean, they just seemed off for people. But I think from the critic standpoint, I think there is a sense of like, they didn't know what to make of his decisions in films that he was choosing, or the movies that he was picking. And there, like I said, there's something about that. Like, I would be curious to know what they would have thought. Like, if Ebert and Roper were still around, or sorry, Ebert and Siskel and Ebert were still around, what they would think about a movie like Pig. I think it was Gene Siskel had Babe as one of his top movies of the year when the year that film came out. So he might not have been happy about what happened with the pig, but overall, I'd be curious to know what they would have thought of a movie like this.
Yeah, I mean, Ebert, it sounds like to me, Ebert would have loved Pig, because he had that rule. It's like, it's not what the movie's about, it how it is about it that matters. And I think that movie just encapsulates his philosophy, because, like I could see him kind of being won over. Like you said, Siskel maybe not so much, but I could definitely see this would be like a film that Ebert would champion.
Yeah, and I think the site actually did review it. I think amongst the many critic reviews for this, I think there's quite a few for this one, because again, it did get it has 231 critic reviews, so it's like pretty intense in terms of Roger Ebert is at the top. I guess they've started doing it where some of these movies, some of these places are getting top billing in that huge list of critic reviews. So they did, I guess, I don't know how that works. Like, it's sort of like the legacy of Ebert, the website that he owned. I guess they hire other critics to do reviews for it.
Yeah, I think they just kind of have like a pool that they pick from, and whoever gets, the big straw gets to review the new movie of the week, and then like, whatever small straw people get the the streaming stuff.
Yeah. It's actually kind of funny. I'm just kind of like, I pulled up the review just to kind of see, and they gave it 4 stars, but they actually used the John Wick comparison as well. They said, basically John Wick with a pig. But I think it's not just that it's John Wick with a pig, but I think it's also the fact that the violence is not like physical violence, except for that one scene where he's getting beaten up in the Fight Club. Beyond that, there really isn't the kind of the violence that you get in John Wick that you're used to. But it is interesting that, this movie, was received well by critics. I think it has that kind of feel to it that that it would have worked. So I do kind of feel like Siskel and Ebert, they probably would have. It would have been interesting to kind of see what kind of fanfare it would have gotten if it came out in the 90s and was like a big, not a big budget, but a big screen release that it got, was probably on more screens, probably would have made more money in the theater, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, if it was, kind of like what we said, like kind of like that, if he had done this movie after leaving Las Vegas, I think it would have really kind of cemented him as kind of like the next kind of Brando, in terms of performances. And but then we would have been robbed of like Face Off, and you know what I mean. So it's kind of interesting to see, how this fell like in his filmography, and if what kind of other performances he'll be kind of capable of going forward.
Yeah, and I think he said in the trivia that this was his favorite role that he's done, and I think there's a sense from him that maybe he couldn't have done this role at the age, in his mid 30s after he had just done Leaving Las Vegas. Like he needed to be closer to 60 and have the films behind him that he's had to be able to do this movie, which that makes sense. I mean, it's in a way it's almost kind of hard to believe with him because he had so many great roles at a young age that were so much more advanced beyond on his years. But maybe that's the sense. Like, I mean, the character he's playing does feel like they're a little bit older than they're supposed to be in the movie. That there's characters that are supposed to be younger than him that are actually older than him in real life. So, maybe you make a great point that maybe this wasn't a movie that could have been made in the 90s for him and come out the way it did.
Yeah, and I think too, with streaming and stuff, I think they call it content now, which makes my eyes roll back. But, I think that with, all these sites kind of looking for, they're hungry for product. And, if that means we get more, idiosyncratic performances by Cage and kind of lower budgeted movies, I mean, I'm all for it.
Yeah, because that's what it felt like in the 90s before we had the kind of the big tent movement that happens in the kind of the later part of the decade. I think Titanic for me kind of feels like the real watershed, where it's like once Titanic was made, there's this mindset of like, wow, we can make movies that make over $1 billion in the gate. Let's see if we can do more of these. And it's now become, I think it feels like the pendulum might be shifting a little bit away because it feels like people are a little bit tired of the Marvel movies that are these, not to say that the Marvel movies are good or bad, but I think there might be some fatigue with that, and that people want to see other things in the theater. But in the 90s, it felt like, movie theaters were not as corporate. There were corporate theaters, but there were also a lot of independently owned theaters. There were a lot of family-run theaters. And so you could get things distributed to those that didn't have to be like from the big movie houses, or even the movie houses themselves. The big movie houses had their own like indie labels, what was the Sony Pictures Classics or something like that. But it just felt like there was more of that in the theater. It felt like you could go. I mean, recently I went and saw Macbeth, the one with Denzel Washington in it, that one of the Coen brothers directed. And it felt nice to see a movie like that in the theater. And it was a smaller indie theater here in Philly that I saw it at. And yeah, this would have been a fun movie to see in the theater, I think. It's nice that the streaming services give us this option that, for my Hulu subscription, I can just watch this and it's a great addition there. But this would have been an interesting one to see in the theater, I think.
Yeah, I think it would have been a good communal experience. I think I think it'd be interesting to see the reactions of people kind of expecting a violent movie, like a typical revenge thriller kind of like kicking their popcorn bucket and like muttering, on their way out of the door. But at the same time, yeah, I can see, it's not exactly a crowd pleaser, but I think it would be like you said, like one of those kind of formative '90s indie films.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. I was thinking of it from my own mindset because I was joking with this screenwriter Tom Joliffe who did a film called When Darkness Falls, and so he was on the podcast and we were talking about the movie, and I was saying how my brain is like velocitized. Like when you're in a car and you're going really fast, and then suddenly you've got to slow down. Like going 100, 50 feels like 25 because the brain is just so used to going 100. And I say how I watch so many action movies that my brain is almost like permanently velocitized, right? That I'm just expecting, a fight scene every 15 minutes, like the PM Entertainment model or something, like a car explosion or something. But I felt like this movie did it in such a way that it was almost like there was action at the points that you expect action in an action movie. It was just, other than that Fight Club scene, the action was a different kind of action, but it still had like the tension and it had the excitement, I guess. I don't know if excitement's the right word, but it definitely had the tension and the rush that you get from an action scene when you're seeing him like confront the sous chef, or he's, confronting the dad, or not really, but he's making the meal for them or whatever. It almost hit the same notes that you'd want from an action movie.
Yeah, and it kind of a weird way too. It kind of reminded me of a little bit of the '70s kind of. So like you could see like somebody like kind of remind me a little bit of Cockfighter with Warren Oates, where it's like this kind of very principled man kind of setting out to do this one thing, and just kind of the cast of characters that kind of he meets along the way. And it seemed like so some of his acting choices too kind of went back to like those old grizzled guys, like Warren Oates a little bit too. Maybe not as, they wouldn't have been as softly spoken as him, but definitely like, in the looks department.
Yeah, and what's another one that maybe comes to mind is and of course that's a more violent movie, but Bronson in Hard Times, I think, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, where he's this character who just sort of kind of goes from town to town, getting into fights with people, and he's not really like, he's like kind of just like slightly better at fighting than other people, but there's a sort of stoicism to it. And then there's Coburn. Coburn almost has the same kind of role that the son had, Amir had, in this, where he's sort of like trying to push him to do more or whatever, but he's kind of more eccentric. And yeah, that's kind of another interesting one. But again, it's a more traditional violent movie that's in Hard Times. It's more of a '70s violent movie, but it's still more in that tradition of what you expect. Where this, I just love the way that they subverted the violence in this. That the violence was in Cage using emotions to whether it was through his food or talking about careers or that kind of thing. That was how he was able to essentially, I don't know if it's say best his opponents, but yeah, to kind of get what he wanted in a way that normally would have been used. It would have been violence in a John Wick movie or something like that.
Yeah, it was almost like something very zen about it, about kind of confronting your enemy without confronting your enemy, and kind of letting them discover their own faults. And it was just kind of, like a unique, one of a kind kind of movie that could still stand, toe to toe with those revenge movies, but seem totally unlike those movies at the same time.
Yeah, and I mean the other thing too, thing with the revenge aspect of this is that this is being posited as a revenge movie, but he never gets revenge on anybody, right? The two tweakers that kill his pig, nothing happens to them. Adam Arkin's character, nothing happens to him for having the pig stolen and ultimately getting killed. There's none of that part of it, which is another interesting aspect of it, because I think maybe for me with the pig dying, I don't think I would have wanted the comeuppance for all of them, but there was that kind of that thing of like, you're used to with a revenge movie that everybody ends up dead, right, and the hero kind of walks off into the sunset.
Yeah, I mean, in like that that's, you know, that's just what made it really kind of, made my eyes open to it even more the second time, because like you said, there are those beats there. It's 90 minutes. There's the, kind of confrontation with the chef, like where he's getting information, but it just kind of, every time you think it's going to turn right, it turns left. And I think that's just what I think will make more people be talking about it for years and years to come.
Yeah, for sure. And I guess, again, we gave the heavy spoiler alerts because we had so much that we had to talk about that gave away the movie. So hopefully anybody who's listening to this either already saw the movie and are coming to hear what we had to think of it, and maybe as somebody watching it, you had some emotions about it and want to see if we said the same things or like the same things or not. But the other thing, of course, is for people who, if you're listening to this and you haven't seen it yet, but you decided to listen through the whole thing, I still think it's worth watching, even though you kind of know what's going to happen. Because I think like in your case, I think you made a good point that for yourself, seeing it a second time through, even though you know everything that's going to happen, it's still a powerful movie.
Yeah, I mean, you just get to kind of soak up the performances a little bit more, the mood, the kind of the atmosphere, and like you said, it's kind of in that kind of color timed, kind of like consistently color timed kind of look that a lot of movies have. But it's at the same time, I think there, it was set in the Pacific Northwest, so it's going to have that gloomy kind of overtone to it anyway. So I think that really worked for the film too.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, Portland is a fascinating city, and I think for people watching this or people listening that are going to see the movie that aren't from the United States, and you're sort of thinking about like American cities, Portland is a very unique one. It's kind of its own thing. I mean, yes, there's a sort of a Pacific Northwest vibe among cities that you've got, Seattle, maybe you get into Canada, you've got Vancouver, and even like to some extent, San Francisco's its own thing, kind of south of there. But Portland is just very unique. It's a big city in the U.S. It's big, but it's not that big. And I mean, the show Portlandia, I think the fact that they were able to make that show for as many seasons as they were and didn't run out of material just shows how unique Portland is. I was kind of maybe a quick aside, like my one trip that I went there, I remember I went to this pizza place with my sister and her boyfriend, and they were, they sold pizzas by the slice, and the slices I guess were kind of big. So I ordered two, and the guy's like, well, are you going to wrap one? Kind of saying like, there's no way you're going to eat two slices, which is just unique, right? Like you wouldn't, in America, you wouldn't be like, I'm not saying America, right? In the East Coast, if somebody orders two slices of whatever, you're kind of expecting, it's like, oh, okay, he's going to eat this or whatever. So I took it as a challenge. And not only did I was like, no, I don't want you to wrap them. I'm going to eat them both. I, of course, ate both and then went up for a third slice just to show him that I was going to do that. But it was like this vibe. And it felt like that was like the vibe around the whole city was, you're going to do that. You're going to do this. You're going to, whatever. It was very unique. It was, people that are, I think, there's a lot of transplants that live in Portland, but I think there's also the people that grew up there that like they kind of have their own vibe to things. And I don't think you could have set this movie anywhere else. Like I think, you think of New York having a fancy food scene, DC obviously with the politicians and whatnot there, or, Chicago has an established scene, or LA. I don't think you could have made this movie anywhere else. And I think I agree with you too, that Portland's weather plays into it just as much as the vibe in that city and sort of what that city's like.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, for a movie as quirky and kind of offbeat as it is, like, it probably couldn't take place anywhere else but Portland.
Yeah, I read in the trivia that they were thinking France or Spain, like maybe like Paris or something like that, or I don't know where in Spain, but I can't imagine. I mean, I know Paris is a very rainy city, but I think it needed to be. I mean, I guess it could have been a smaller city in one of those countries as well. But I mean, Portland. I think they've got the basketball team and they've got the MLS soccer team. But as far as big cities go, it's definitely on the smaller end, and probably has. I think they mentioned Seattle a little bit there. There's a little bit of a rivalry between them in Seattle, because Seattle's maybe like the bigger brother kind of city, which I definitely get, being in Philadelphia now with New York being right by. I'm sure probably like in Maryland, I'm sure, Baltimore, DC kind of thing. It's like those kind of things. But Portland, it's like a very different thing because I think the distance to Seattle, it allows it to be its own thing a little bit more and have its own identity, but yet also kind of rebel against any kind of notion that they're somehow grouped with Seattle or San Francisco or something like that.
Well, yeah, I mean, and too, I mean, you can also see that in like the characters too. I think all of those characters, except for maybe Alan Arkin, but like, you know, you can definitely see. I'm not sure what Nicolas Cage's character looked like, but you know, before all the bad stuff happened to him, but he definitely has a personality that's just kind of, you know, off center enough to kind of fit right in.
Yeah, and one other performance that I really appreciated as someone who, you know, grew up watching reruns of the Rockford Files. I liked Gretchen Corbett as the truffle woman, or the woman who's selling truffles. Who she's the one who first realizes that it's these two meth tweakers that steal the pig or kidnap Cage's pig, and they go and confront them at their trailer. And I really liked her part in that. It was just very much, you know, like you know, a farmer's market vendor with an edge that again would be like kind of very unique to Portland. That you know, farmer's market vendor would have a certain edge probably in Portland. I mean, and again, I went to one, I think, when I was there, and there was it's a whole unique thing, and she plays that part really well. Having those kinds of performances, I think, always just round out a movie.
Right, and like, you know, in a more traditional kind of action movie, that scene might have taken place like in a meth lab or like a you know, like a wherever they're running drugs out of, and you know, the head of the, you know, assembly line would like stop the drugs and run out. And so, you know, like you said, for it to be like a farmer's market, it was just like another unique spin on like the tried and true kind of formula.
Well, right, and again, it's the whole idea of the revenge movie. You know, they go and confront this couple in their trailer, and you know, nobody gets beaten up, nobody gets punched. In fact, there's no repercussions for them stealing the pig. They just say, "Oh, we gave the pig away to some black guy in a truck," and which, of course, we know now as we watch the movie that was false. That never happened. That they just said that to get him away, and but that, of course, leads him on this whole journey because they think that the pig is in the city, and that's where they can go to rescue her. But you know, in a John Wick movie, right? Those two are not going to survive the end of that scene. You know, they're going to be done. Whether it's like like a meth lab that gets blown up and they all get blown up inside of it, or you know, they're shooting. You know, there's probably some kind of a fight that happens there anyway. That like maybe even the main character doesn't kill them in cold blood, but they attack him and he has to fight back. Whereas this was just like, you kidnapped my pig. Okay, I'm going to go get it. You know, it wasn't even like a calling the police kind of thing. I mean, now that I think about it, it's like they didn't even think like, okay, let's call the police and say, let's get the pig back and have the police like interrogate these two tweakers who just admitted to stealing the pig. You know, it was a very unique kind of approach to that.
Yeah, it kind of had like a Coen Brothers kind of vibe to it a little bit too. Of like, you know, they were so kind of like stoned out of their gourd anyway. That would they have even known that they had just got beat up, or you know what I mean? It wouldn't have. I think at that point, it wouldn't have made much of a difference. But it definitely has like in that same tradition too of almost like a detective story of, you know, getting the info from the one person who gets a lead from the other person and kind of moves up the food chain. And I think that was another thing you got to see kind of how the underbelly of everything worked. Like, you know, Cage was at the bottom of this food chain of getting the truffles, and then the son, you know, moving it to the farmer's market. And, you know, it keeps getting a little bit more sophisticated the more you went up the line.
Yeah, and what was fascinating, I think, about the movie was that, yes, you had the you had the what was it the you had the element of the detective piece, right, where we're sort of uncovering the mystery of what happened with the pig. But what was fascinating is at the same time we were uncovering the mystery of who Nicolas Cage's character was. And I like that kind of dual reveal aspect of the film, that we it's almost like the movie, and again, I still had these issues with the movie with the woman killing the pig off, but the kind of the dual reveal aspect as he's going on this journey, and we're sort of accompanying him on this journey and learning who he was a real fascinating element of the film as well.
Yeah, and then kind of like the flip side of the chef that he confronts in the ritzy place, like when he goes back to his old restaurant, he sees that it's I don't know if we were led to believe it was his daughter or if it was just whoever was working there. I want to say it was his daughter, but I can't remember if they gave that specific detail.
Yeah.
But she had made the old restaurant into a bakery, and she said, "Well, you're a chef. I'm a baker." So now we made it into a bakery, and you can kind of see, the reverse of what the sous chef was doing. And of course, there's nobody kind of in the bakery. This doesn't look like it's doing a booming business, but she's actually carved her own path and made what Cage gave her into something that was her own.
Yeah, which I really, and then of course, like he wanted that salted baguette because that was part of the meal, and he knew that she was the best person to make it. So that was really great too, the way that they incorporated that too. Yeah, I think this movie, to me, I think again, I didn't feel as fulfilled with the fact that the pig died, but I kind of get why they made the decision, and I'm coming to terms with it a little bit more. But I think overall, this is just a very special film that I don't know how often this kind of movie gets made anymore. It feels like, in the 90s, you could get, a few of these a year. I don't know. And of course, I'm not watching a lot of new movies, and a lot of what I'm watching is just, low budget action. But this movie really works on a lot of levels.
Yeah, I mean, and it could almost serve as kind of a critique to the kind of DTV movies that Cage was putting out, for the past 5 or 6 years. And it's like, well, see, I can do a formula movie, and it'll be what it is, or we can take that same formula and kind of give it a little breathe a little new life into it. So I think it's, for someone who wants the same old, there are plenty of other Nicolas Cage movies you could bide your time with. But if you want something that's kind of, elevating the genre, I hate that term that like elevate, but I mean, this is one of those terms where it applies. It takes what you love about the genre and then just kind of not even puts a new coat of paint on it, but just like rebuilds it from the ground up.
Yeah, it's a fascinating. I don't know if anti-action is the right word for it. It's like the negative, and negative in the sense of like a film or something like that. Like it's like somehow like the yin to the yang or something like that. It's really fascinating the way it plays out. When we, think what we think of as action, again, like even just using this John Wick term, this John Wick comparison, it's like the anti-Wick in a way.
Yeah, because I mean, when you first, I think, at least when I think of John Wick, I think of him like, coming in, just beating up, massacring 30 guys in a row, but that you have to go through a certain number of steps to get to that point. And they both start at kind of the same place, and kind of even sort of finish at the same place.
Yeah.
But what happens in the middle is totally, could be different night and day, but it's still thematically essentially the same movie.
Yeah, I mean, even like you said at the very end, when he's like collecting all of these items to get the pig back, we don't know what he's getting, but there's the sense that think of like old A-Team episodes, right, where it's like they're getting ready for the final fight scene, and it's like they've got blow torches and they're like welding things together and making these big machines and whatever out of like the whatever's in this like shed or something like that, so they can confront the baddies and take them down. There's a sense of like that's going to be what happens, and instead it's him showing the son how to make this meal and then presenting the meal to the father and evoking an emotional response that gets the same result of it's a different kind of violence, though. There was something violent about it in my mind. It felt violent to me, just in a very different kind of way.
Well, in the way that he serves it, he doesn't exactly serve it in the most congenial manner to him. I mean, he shows him the wine or whatever, but I mean, he kind of just slams it in front of in front of Adam Arkin a little bit, kind of aggressively. I mean, it's not like he's not, the presentation or whatever wasn't part of the charm of it. But I mean, another way you can look at that too is, he's teaching the son how to make this dish. So he's kind of saying, hey, anytime your old man is kind of down in the dumps, you can do this.
Yeah.
And maybe you'll, it was, a potential way for them to build their bridges back.
Yeah. And it was, I mean, it was just like the scene with the, I mean, in a way, like all of these moments that he uses to try to get what he needs, there are these elements of aggression that are just not traditional aggression. I mean, even like the character Edgar, who runs these underground fights, he doesn't beat up Edgar to get the information that he wants out of him. He volunteers for himself to get beaten up by one of the maitre d's or kitchen workers to then get what he needs out of Edgar. And then, when that sous chef is there, he doesn't beat up the sous chef to get what he wants. He emotionally digs at him saying, what are you doing working here when you wanted an English pub? Look what you're doing. This is not anything. This is what did he say? It's not real. This isn't real what you're doing here. And he just kind of digs at him in a way that's very different from, again, we would see in an action movie, he would have slammed his head against the table, maybe stabbed him with something, like you said, broken a finger or something like that. Instead, he's getting him emotionally and hitting him there. And then the father, right, that he's, planning this whole thing, that the whole A-team, when a plan comes together, it's a meal. He's building a meal. It's not welding together, armor to put outside of a garbage truck in a warehouse or whatever it was, the A-team guys would do, when they were taking down the baddies at the end of the episode. And again, there was still aggression there where it's like the dad is just completely broken down, and the dad doesn't know that he can be broken down like that. That's kind of the big thing, is that like you said, he's like still sitting there with his arms folded and kind of standoffish, waiting to, assuming that this isn't going to do anything to him. And then immediately it hits him, or not immediately, but there's that point where it hits him and he has to leave the room. It hits him so hard. It's that sense of aggression without physically harming the people that he needs to get this information from. It was such an anti-action movie thing that I, as a huge action movie fan, I had to appreciate it.
And, you were saying that at one point it would have been 2.5 hours. And I wonder if some of the stuff that had been cut out might have been kind of reinforcing these plot points, which might have been redundant, and, having them kind of occur more organically and kind of, even picking stuff up maybe the second time that you might have missed, I think works better, because if they had spelled everything out, I don't think we would be talking about it like we have been. I think it would have, might have even kind of been a little clunky, but to just kind of casually showing the son how to make a meal without words. And I think there are a couple really cool close-ups of like Nicolas Cage's hands while he's baking. He's like really getting in there, and like even the early scenes where he's like digging for truffles, he's like, it just seemed like he really knew, kind of like, I know it's all acting, but it looked like he had done that a million times before, and it was just like kind of like it was like a riding a bike, like he could have done this anytime he wanted, prepared this meal.
Yeah, and I think in the trivia, the director Sarnowski said he was really impressed with how much Cage really got into this role. He wasn't expecting, he didn't expect him to really prepare the way he did, which, I don't know what that means, because it feels like he's always preparing that kind of thing, but you could see it was there, right? That the way, like you said, the way he dug for truffles, the way he was using the knife to, what was that, like a game hen or something like that they were, he was serving, and the way he was using the knife to cut to cut it right at like the joint, so that you can take it away from the rest of the breast or something. I can't, I think it was like thighs that he was serving. I don't remember, but that precision with which he did that. Like you said, to see that on the screen that way, and according to the film, he would do these things with only a couple takes. So it's like he must have watched things and practiced doing that one scene.
Yeah, I mean, and like I said, you just really buy him as like this guy that went into the woods. Now he might have prepared stuff for himself. Who knows, cooking or whatever while living in the woods. But like, it just was. And that was kind of, maybe like another hint that like he's moving on from this hermit, like he's preparing food for another human being, which is something he hasn't done in maybe a decade or however long it was. So even that was showing that he's kind of evolving as the film kind of starts coming to the end.
Yeah, no, that's a really great point, because again, from my brain, seeing it as like they're trying to get the pig, whereas no, the movie's supposed to be about his own transformation and his own journey, that he never would have made a meal for anybody else unless he absolutely had to. And this was the only way he was going to get Adam Arkin's character, to tell him where the pig is. He had to make this meal. And you're right, it'd probably been a decade or more since he had last made a meal for another human. He made a meal that the pig eats with him in the opening scenes. But yeah, that idea that he would do anything he would to try to find this pig, and he makes this meal that you're right. It was part of his progression out of the doldrums that he was living in for the past however many years.
Yeah, and I think too. I mean, it's just, another interesting kind of aspect too is he gets progressively bloody and dirty and just kind of just coated and all sorts of stuff throughout the movie. He already kind of starts off looking, like the mountain man that he's supposed to be. But after he's beaten up and kind of, left on the side of the road, left out in the rain, he just becomes even more disheveled. But the more disheveled he becomes, the more kind of opened up he becomes too. So that was a nice little juxtaposition.
Yeah. I think the journey or the progression piece. I mean, again, going back to maybe that Wizard of Oz comparison, where or the Greek myth comparison, right? That it's always about the journey and the progress a person has along the way. The film unfolded that in such a really organic way that, and you're right, it is interesting. I didn't really consider that, the fact that he's getting more beat up throughout the film. He is opening up more. It's almost like there's like literal wounds and figurative wounds that are opening and being revealed to us.
Yeah, it's just like I said, like, we're sitting here and kind of just talking back and forth and discovering kind of new aspects to it. Whereas like in the 2.5 hour movie, if they had spelled out certain things like that, it wouldn't have resonated so much. So I think, just another kind of example of like, sometimes 90 minutes is the best length for a movie.
Yeah, I mean, I know Corman said it more because I think he said 88 minutes, right? Because that's 8 reels, and so that's like the perfect amount of like you go to 90 minutes, you get into that 12th reel, and you're wasting money. But yeah, it's there aren't many movies. I mean, I know a lot of comic book movies they tend to be, but I also noticed like Netflix, they have a lot of movies that breach the 2-hour mark, and I do wonder if this film had been made strictly for Netflix. I bet you Netflix would have let them make it at 2.5, because they do tend to let movies be longer. And you wonder if that's another piece of it. Like, yes, it's the distributors told him to make it an hour shorter. He could have maybe sold it somewhere else that would have let him keep it at that extra time. But the fact that he said, okay, no, I'll cut an hour off. And it seems like he cut the right hour off because everything worked. That there is something to the process of movies, the way we've always known them to be, that does work on some levels. There were aspects of it that weren't good in terms of gatekeeping and whatnot, but I think there were other parts of it that kept filmmakers somewhat in check, and how they made movies.
Yeah, and I think a lot of those Netflix originals, I mean, they kind of give them carte blanche, but so many of them could have been a half hour, or at least shorter. And there's I think we both said this on separate occasions. Like, if you get over 98 minutes, you better really knock my socks off
Yes.
because I've just already kind of gave you about eight more minutes than I should have. I think. And I think we gauge our expectations a little bit differently. Maybe if we had known, going in like, oh, this is kind of like an art house kind of, revenge kind of thriller, we might have been a little bit more lenient. But at the same time, like I said, I've watched so much crap lately that half the time I'm looking down at the bar to see how much time I've got left on the display, and trying to like talk myself into sitting through it. Or is this where like I watched it one sitting and it was like just the perfect length.
Yeah, I mean, to kind of follow up on that, I had planned to watch part of this. So Wednesdays are trash day here in our part of Philadelphia. So the trash, it's usually collected early in the morning on Wednesday. So that means I've got to get it out there Tuesday night onto the curb. And I had this idea that I was going to watch some of the movie and then do the trash and then come back and finish it. And that didn't happen. I just made it through the whole movie. Like you said, it kind of just moves you right through, which I thought was really, obviously it was a nice surprise that, that I was like, oh, I'm almost done with this movie. I'm just going to just watch it and finish it off. But yeah, I mean, I don't know that we would have even been doing this for the episode if it was 2.5 hours. I think it would have been tough to ask. I mean, I know we've done episodes where, done more than one movie, but that's a little different than doing one movie that's really long.
Yeah, and I know last time we watched Godfrey Ho, and it makes me wonder what Godfrey Ho would have done with this plot. He definitely wouldn't have gone the nonviolent route. And
no. Well, can you imagine? It would be like scenes of Nicolas Cage like talking to somebody in China or somebody from in Hong Kong on a phone. Maybe there would have been spliced in shots of a Garfield phone there. Well, Mitch, as we're wrapping up, is there anything else about this movie that you want to talk about that we didn't touch on?
No, I think we covered it pretty well. I mean, this is just kind of, like I said, it like plays in the revenge thriller sandbox, and then it takes all the sand out, and then just does its own thing.
Yes.
For fans of Nicolas Cage, I mean, Face Off, I think will always be my favorite, but. This is definitely probably moved into like the top 4 or 5 on this rewatch.
Yeah, I think you're right there. I mean, I haven't seen as many Nicolas Cages that I probably need to. I think I like Red Rock West is one I still need to see. But I think just in thinking about like my favorites of his, this is definitely one that I wouldn't have expected anything that he's made in the past however many years to breach that top 4 or 5. And this does, and I think even for people that aren't people who aren't fans of Cage, I think because I think there are some out there who don't like Cage. For those people, I think this would be an even more interesting watch to see how they, how they feel about seeing him on screen like this.
Well, yeah, I mean, it used to be in Hollywood, like you would have a comeback movie. Like if you didn't make a movie for 3 years or whatever, and he makes 2 or 3 movies every year, but this felt like almost like a comeback movie, like, even though it wasn't widely released, but it felt like I won't say return to form, but it felt like a, kind of getting back to kind of why he does these kind of character roles.
Yeah, this felt like 90s Cage was back. I think that's maybe the best way. That's maybe the way I was thinking of it.
Yeah, absolutely. It definitely felt like he, he just committed to every dialogue, nuance, performance. I mean, every scene, like I said, he looks disheveled, but even underneath the hair and the mud and the blood, I like those eyes and like the posture. I mean, he just every scene he was just wonderful in.
Yeah, actually, next I know we're close to wrapping up, but that reminds me one thing about this that I really liked was that scene when he's at the sous chef's restaurant, and the sous chef is there, kind of just not knowing what to make of them because he doesn't recognize who Nicolas Cage is yet, And the son Amir says to Nicolas Cage, tell him who you are. And he doesn't tell him who he is. He just looks up at him and looks him directly in the face, and the sous chef recognizes him. And even that was just like such a powerful scene, because in my head, my brain is racing in sort of this action movie velocitized state where I'm like, just tell him who you are. Just say the name. Once you say the name, he's going to be like, oh, it's that name. But he doesn't. He never says his name. He just looks up at him, and the guy recognizes him. And that was just that scene. It's like you said, it was just kind of that Cage presence there. The way he did that was just so fantastic.
Yeah, and again, just like another twist on that typical cliche confrontation scene where he, just a glance says more than what he could, verbalize.
Yeah, it was. I mean, yeah, you think of like someone like a Chuck Norris, right, who would do the same thing, or Bruce Lee, right, that would do the same thing. He's doing it in this completely, in the same context, but in a very different way.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, it felt like it was a genre piece with being furthest from the genre that you could kind of get while still being in that genre.
Yeah, I think your description of it as playing in the same sandbox, but emptying all the sand out of the sandbox might be the best way to think of it. I think of it as that, or like this sort of like this anti-version, right? It's almost like I don't know if bizarro is the right word, but it's almost like you join the two together to make a whole or something like that.
Well, yeah, and as much as Cage loves Superman, bizarro version would probably he would probably appreciate that.
Right. That's a good point. Yeah, so he probably dig that reference there. Well, Mitch, as we're wrapping up here, is there anything that you'd like to plug?
Well, everybody could always come say hi to me on Twitter. I'm at the Video Vacuum. And then if you want to come see my blog, I haven't updated it recently, but I'll be getting back into that once summer slows down. It's www.thevideovacuum.blogspot.com. And then, of course, you can always check out my many books on Amazon. Just search for Mitch Lovell, Lovell, and my author page will come up. And if you like movies about Expendables actors and horror and all kinds of B movies and big budget stuff alike, check them out.
Yeah, good point. Because we've got kind of two things coming out, right? We've got Halloween coming in the near future, which I think your Bloody Book of Horror is just like a really great collection for people who have horror movie collections, horror memorabilia collections. But then, they're currently filming the new Expendables 4. So I think people, as they're getting ready for that movie, I have that one. I have both books, but I think the Expendables, or the Unexpendable guides to those actors is a great way for people to get into the new Expendable movie coming out, to kind of check out some of those films from some of those actors that beyond the Expendables movies. Yeah,
I'm a little nervous about the Expendables 4 with the giving Stallone and Sylvester Stallone credit at the end. I'm hoping they don't really expend him, but right. Who knows?
Yeah, so it's going to be interesting to see, because I think part of the reason why Stallone may have made that movie is that his post Expendables, especially Expendables 3, it didn't work out like he wanted it to. I think he had the couple Creed movies that he liked, but I we're now realizing that he doesn't own the rights to the Rocky character, so he's not getting the joy from those that he wanted. And then he did this last Rambo movie, but I think he wants to stay relevant in the big screen world, and it's kind of a reality now that a lot of people are having trouble staying relevant in that world. And I think if he was to do something like Nicolas Cage did here with Pig, it could be just as relevant or just as great for his career. I'd love to see him do a Rocky movie that's kind of like that.
Yeah, I mean, everybody kind of forgot how good he was until Copland came out, and they're like, "Oh yeah, he's a dramatic actor. We forgot about that." But then he never really capitalized on that. He kind of went back to doing kind of actioners. I think in his twilight years, I think he could really kind of find the right part with the right director. I think he could really kind of make everybody kind of realize what Stallone is capable of.
Yeah, you make a great point, because that's what made Rocky so great, was that him as a dramatic actor sold the part. And then it's like, you get into the sequels. I mean, like Rocky 3, 4, and 5 that are just sort of these like essentially action sports movies, where killings and action sequences and kind of stuff like that going on. He kind of gets away from. I know he tries to come back to it with Creed, but the Creed movies are more about Michael B. Jordan's character than it is about his. I mean, his character does have some part of the arc, but almost like the way that Dolph's character kind of came full circle in Creed 2. It would be nice if Stallone could somehow get the right to the property in a way to finish the series the way that he really could in a more dramatic way that kind of is reminiscent of the first Rocky.
It's funny because I think everybody's counted Stallone out at one point, and he's always proved them wrong. I think everybody, when Rocky Balboa came out, there was kind of like oh really, like
Right.
Is this gonna fly? No pun intended, but I think there was I think he proved everybody wrong with Rocky Balboa, and even when Creed was kind of first coming up, people were like, really, they're still doing rock? And I think they've always shown that there's still life in the Rocky franchise and character, and hopefully the whole feud that's going on now will subside, and everybody will realize that, hey, we could all actually make a lot of money here, because I think that's the only thing that gets people kind of on the same side in Hollywood.
Right.
So I don't think Rocky's down for the count. Again, no pun intended, but
Right.
I think it's just kind of a show me the money kind of thing.
Yeah, and maybe a movie like Pig, and they see the sort of success that it had, that it it made, I think, like 3.5 million gross in the box office, maybe a little bit more than that. And so obviously, I think Stallone, that anybody with the franchise, they're thinking blockbuster. They're thinking something in the hundreds of millions of dollars worldwide. If they could scale it back and make Rocky something like this, I think for the fans of Rocky, it could be the real closure on that story that everybody would be looking for.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's interesting. It could be because every kind of, even after five seemed to like end things at a good place, and you're like, okay, I can see where that would be the end. But then Rocky Balboa comes along, you're like, okay, I can see where you would want to, and then he just keeps giving you just that much more
Right.
to kind of think about. And I think, honestly, Rocky, more so than any of his other characters, is a reflection of who Sly is at that moment.
Yeah.
And I think when he has something to say about where he is at now, I think that might really spur, like, kind of, get the ball rolling on another film. But I think, Rocky's a reflection of him, and hopefully he'll be able to do another one if he wishes.
Yeah, I agree. I think you're right. Like, whatever's going on with the people, that the producers that I guess own the rights to the character, that maybe something will happen there and they'll kind of fix it. I mean, he's closing in on, he just turned 77. So he's closing in on 80, and I think whatever decisions that they make about fixing, these things, whatever decisions that they make, and they shouldn't mess around too long with them. That they should consider, getting this thing moving in the right way. If he thinks he's got another Rocky movie left in him, I say, don't mess around with it. Whatever issues are there, come together and let him end this series the way he wants to.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, if anyone's kind of earned their place in Hollywood history, it's him.
Yeah. I mean, when I think of sports movies, I think Rocky. There's so many movies that rip off Rocky that even these true stories, they rip off Rocky in the sense of like this underdog that kind of comes out of nowhere, and everybody kind of against all odds they win. It's either that, or I always joke, it's that or the Bad News Bears paradigm, right, where it's like a ragtag group of teammates come together against all odds and win. But Rocky did the Rocky paradigm best, and I think it's always going to have that place. I mean, here in Philadelphia, I mean, they've Joe Louis, they've had other boxers here, but it's like they still have that Rocky statue because I think people of Philadelphia like that Rocky showed the world Philadelphia in a way that Philadelphia doesn't usually get shown, and so it has that kind of place with people. And I think, yeah, you kind of hope that whatever issues are happening there kind of get resolved and we get that movie.
Yeah, I mean, and it doesn't really. I mean, I'm sure there'll be boxing in it, but I mean, at this point, he's not going to be getting in the ring, I don't think. But, at least something to either sow the seeds for. I mean, I think Creed sowed the seeds enough for future generations, and I think that franchise is going to keep going on, maybe even as long as Rocky has. But like you're right, it would be nice just to get one more solo Rocky movie out there.
Yeah, I think so. I think I think it just like I don't know if it's closure. I don't know if that's the right word, but I think yeah. I mean, he kind of did the last Rambo, so it's kind of just fitting that he would get a chance to maybe do one more that's just him. That's not a Creed movie or anything else. That's a one last Rocky movie.
And I mean, I think there was an idea. I think they and I don't know if it's kind of like a demographic kind of thing where they say, well, Creed was successful because we had a younger male lead, and you were the supporting actor, and maybe I don't know if they're leery of having him leading the film or they think they need like some younger character in there to carry the film. But it's like I said, nobody's earned more goodwill and earned their spot in Hollywood limelight than Stallone. So I say I mean, I'm sure he could do it for 10 million. I'm sure he would rather not see a dime. If he had a story to tell, he would take a hit financially just to tell that story.
Yeah, I agree, especially with Rocky. I think Rocky is the one that he just that's the one that's his. I mean, obviously, Rambo is a big character for him. Now he's got his character Barney. I can't think of the name. Barney Ross. Yeah, and so he's got some other new characters, but I think Rocky is always going to be his guy, and I think I think you're right that if he's got something he wants to tell us, if he has a story he wants to tell, that he's going to do it with Rocky for sure.
I mean, I'm not, I still know he'll be around for a while, but with the moment he does, pass on, that's what they're gonna show clips of. They're gonna, what I mean? Yeah, yes, Demolition Man, sure, Cobra, yeah, Tango and Cash, yeah, I love all those movies, but it's gonna be Rocky. That's gonna be on, all the clips and stuff.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you think about it, because now that he's been coming back, right? What is he? I mean, he's trying to do these other, like the escape plan movies and things like that. But Rocky's the one that I think he looks at and it's like, yeah, I've got a lot of things to talk about here. So hopefully we'll see it. Hopefully we'll get that other movie. But in the meantime, we'll kind of see what happens when Expendables 4 comes out.
Oh yeah, I mean, I can't wait. I mean, Tony Jaa and Iko Uwais in a movie together, let alone like Dolph Lundgren and Stallone and Statham, and I'm gonna be there first night.
Yeah, I'm excited for this. So we'll have something like that. Maybe that'll be something when it comes out. Maybe we'll do a podcast episode on that. It's coming out next year, so we'll get together before then. But maybe that's something to do.
Awesome.
Right, excellent. Well, Mitch, thank you again for coming on. This was a really great conversation about a really, really interesting and really great movie.
Yeah, I mean, if anyone hasn't seen it and they didn't get it spoiled here, definitely run out and check it out. It's on Hulu.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, I have a feeling if people did listen to this and now we've given it all away, I think it's still an enjoyable movie. But if you didn't heed our warning at the beginning, I think this still could be a good one to watch. Oh,
absolutely. Especially, if even if you're a fan of action movies and you're a fan of, and you aren't a fan of action movies, I think you'll enjoy it for what it does and what it doesn't do simultaneously.
Yeah, I totally agree. And again, you're in and out in 90 minutes, so you can't go wrong there. So, so all good things there. Excellent. Well, thanks again, Mitch, for coming on. It was a great conversation, and thanks everybody for listening. And we'll be back soon. Bye.
Hear that? That's the sound of a patient whose health data is protected from a cyber attack. And that's the sound of a financial system that's digitally secured from bad actors. Right now, there's an invisible war being fought on a digital battlefield that impacts what we do every day. That's why at Peraton, we do the can't be done to help protect the vital systems we rely on. Because if we don't, the alternative is unimaginable. Peraton.